A good day to you. You're watching CNN. I'm Richard Quest in New York. I'll have the latest on the war in Ukraine in just a moment. This morning, though, I want to start with what's happening in the financial markets and the weakness that we are seeing at the moment. US futures are lower. And the significance, of course, is also on the NASDAQ, where you can see a loss of 1.5% forecast. But this follows a very sharp fall on the highly valued tech stocks that were hammered in the Wednesday session. Now, Wednesday, the NASDAQ fell more than 3%. That is being reflected across European markets, which, as you can see there on the market, Paris off 2.5%, Frankfurt down 2.25%, London is off 2%. It is a massive repricing of risk on global stock markets as investors are slashing expectations for profitability in a world of slower growth and rising inflation. That's what we're talking about at the moment. Rising inflation. We've got numbers on PPI, which is producer prices, wholesale. What we used to say is the price at the factory gate. Rahel's with me. Well, what did the number show this morning?
Well, Richard, if markets were looking for some good news, hate to say it, but they didn't find it here. So PPI year over year came in at 11%. That was slightly cooler than the figure we saw the month prior, 11.2%. But prices still rose 0.5% month over month. As one analyst told me, as one economist told me yesterday about the CPI report, no upside to what we're seeing here. Dow futures were up lower by about 200 points before the numbers crossed, Richard. They then settled around 150 after these numbers crossed. So not great news in terms of this high inflation that we're seeing. We saw it yesterday with CPI, and we know that what we tend to see in PPI, the producer price index, tends to trickle down into consumer prices a few months later. So no good news to be had here, Richard.
Maybe we shouldn't necessarily expect because the underlying fundamentals haven't changed. For example, the interest rates from the Fed haven't had a chance to work through and we haven't had the most of them yet. Secondly, the war in Ukraine continues. Thirdly, energy prices remain still elevated. So companies are saying what?
Well, that's the other thing. So Disney reported yesterday, right? Disney considered a top-of-the-line, best-in-class American company. And the numbers were strong. It was strong additions to subscribers. That came in at 137.7 million subscribers. Their parks business was strong. But here's what investors may be keying into. The CFO reported that slowing growth may be on its way for streaming in the second half. Richard, it is this warning about slowing growth that we are hearing more of. It almost feels like a whisper that's growing louder. In fact, B of A put out some research that said the mentions of weaker demand from companies is the most it's been since Q2 of 2020. You have higher inflation, and now you have companies starting to forecast and signal that demand may be softening later this year. It's not a great recipe, Richard. In fact, it could spell out a lot more pain.
Lord, we're just looking there at the price. Disney's share price was $180. Back in May of last year on the back of Disney Plus, now at 105. Rahel, thank you. That graph, that chart very much tells the story. Rahel will talk later because widely held stocks, particularly tech stocks, have plunged since the start of this year. It's a reassessment of risk. You see it very clearly. Amazon has now lost almost all its gains since the pandemic. Apple, which tends to buck the trend in a sense, down 17%. 5% alone went off the price on Wednesday. It's no longer the world's most valuable company. That now becomes Saudi Aramco. Perhaps not surprisingly, it's an oil company. It's worth $2.5 trillion with a market cap of 2.4. They'll battle that one backwards and forwards for the foreseeable future. Shares of Airbnb are down more than 25% in the last month, which is interesting, bearing in mind we're coming up to the summer and it's when people start planning and actually bookings are strong. So I spoke to the chief executive and asked him about the volatility.
There's an old saying by a late economist, I think his name was Benjamin Graham. He said, in the short run, a stock price is a voting machine. In the long run, it's a weighing machine. It goes up, it goes down. If you hold the stock long enough, the great companies will go up. But right now, it's a mood, and right now the mood is soured. So I think that's the way it is right now. I think the highest growth companies are also sometimes the more speculative ones, and people don't want to take a lot of risk right now. And so I think that's what's happening in the market. But ultimately, as a CEO, I try to focus on things I can control. I certainly can't control the stock market. I can control the performance of the company, and that's what we're focused on.
Right, but when, for example, Uber's CEO, you may have seen the letter that he wrote to the staff, basically saying that the times are going to get tough. We've got to make money. There's got to be a return on capital. Right. And I'm old enough to remember the old days of path to profitability of the 1990s. Do you have to think the same things? There has to be a better business case.
We already went through all that. In 2020, we lost 80% of our business in 8 weeks. We had to make painful decisions. We did a layoff, restructured our company. We rebuilt the company from the ground up. Then we took it public. In Q1, we did $1.2 billion of free cash flow. In Q1 is our low season. Most people aren't traveling between January and March. So though I can't speculate on what Q2, Q3 will be, you can look at our last year's financials to get a sense of what's going to happen. So we are lean. We have 6,000 employees. We were very, very profitable from a free cash flow standpoint in Q1. We're feeling really good, and we are not pulling on the brakes. We're stepping on the gas.
So how does he step on the gas? You'll see the whole interview. It's in Questmeans Business later today. That's at 3 o'clock Eastern, of course, 8 o'clock UK, 9 on the continent. Our attention now, we turn to Russia's war in Ukraine. The leaders of Finland say their country must apply for NATO membership without delay. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has denounced the move. He said Finland joining NATO would be a threat to Russia. The US, UK and other NATO allies have expressed support for Finland's potential membership. It's traditionally tried to stay neutral. The war has dramatically changed the country's view on Moscow. And so to new drone and satellite images showing the Ukrainian forces blowing up pontoon bridges in Luhansk. They did it twice in a 24-hour period. The goal, to keep Russians from crossing a key river. But Ukraine says Russian troops are making slow but steady advances in some areas of the east. And Ukraine is offering to release Russian prisoners of war. In exchange, it would be for the safe evacuation of the wounded Ukrainian soldiers at the bombed Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. It follows the UN's warning that the civilian death toll in Mariupol is expected to be in the thousands. A lot there to digest. This morning, though, the main event, in a sense, is Finland's further moves towards NATO membership. Our international diplomatic editor is Nick Robertson. He's in the Finnish capital. He's in Helsinki this morning. So, Nick, I guess at one level it's not a surprise that the leadership has said this. Parliament will obviously now debate and vote, but essentially it's a when, not if.
It's a done deal. There is already a groundswell of public support. About 75% of the population estimated, according to local news organizations. And I spoke to the support NATO membership, and I spoke to a member of the Prime Minister's party, a parliamentarian of some standing here, just yesterday. And he said, look, when it comes to a vote of 200 parliamentarians, we're expecting in excess of 180 to vote yes in favor of joining NATO. So this direction that's been set and given by the Prime Minister and the President in a joint statement that NATO will improve Finland's security, Finland will help strengthen NATO, that they should move without delay. This is the signal. They didn't want to have the debate be too long. They didn't want this period to be protracted because they don't want and are worried about threats from Russia and an escalation in tensions by Russia. But absolutely, today marks the day when we're just a couple of tiny steps away from Finland making it official.
Now, Russia has said that there will be consequences. If we take a look again at the map that shows this very long border that the country has with Russia, we know that one of the aspects could be, from the Russian side, boosting up the number of troops that it keeps on that border. But of course, if it does that, it will have to come at the expense of elsewhere. What's the latest thinking, Nick, on what Russia's response will be?
Yeah, there are two thoughts on that. One is the need to move fast now is because Russia does have its troops distracted and deployed in Ukraine and not along that border. Russia has said that it will monitor what Finland does. If Finland builds more troops, more military facilities along the border, then they will reciprocate. So that's the way they're framing it at the moment. They have threatened to put nuclear weapons on the edge of the Baltic Sea. That will be Kaliningrad. The assessment is Russia has them there already. The view from here is that this is about, and the president said this just yesterday, this is about Finland's security.
Right.
They don't feel secure with Russia right now. But this is not about an aggressive move against Russia. So the view from here is that they hope that Russia doesn't make escalatory moves.
Okay, but Nick...
And quite simply, they can't trust it not to.
But Nick, isn't this exactly what Russia said the West did post-97 when all the other countries joined, thus creating what in Russia's view was an instability and an insecurity? And whilst we could go backwards and forwards in a schoolboy argument of, well, you started it, no, you started it first, the reality is Russia will regard this as being an unstable and insecure.
Yes, they're going to regard it that way. And the question therefore becomes, what will Russia do about it? And part of the international message to Russia has been that your actions are triggering an equal and opposite reaction on the ground. You don't want NATO to come close. You attack Ukraine, and NATO puts more people on its border in the east because it's concerned about security because of your Russia's actions.
Right.
And that's what's occurring here. And it is that message that it is hoped that this incumbent of the presidency of Russia gets the message. If not, future generations of Russian leaders will understand that the kind of actions they're going through right now have reactions, whether or not they want it, irrespective of who made the first move. This is where things stand. This is geopolitics. It's really that simple. That's the message.
Nick Robertson in Helsinki, sir, thank you. Ukraine's top prosecutor has announced the indictment of a Russian military commander for the killing of an unarmed Ukrainian civilian. The soldier is to be the first to stand trial for a war crime committed in Ukraine. CNN's senior international correspondent Sarah Seidner is with me from the capital, Kyiv, and takes up the tale.
Yeah, so we have obtained some video that shows murderous actions by soldiers against two unarmed civilians. I want to warn you that the video you are about to see is disturbing, but this video is now being used as a part of an investigation into war crimes. This is a stark example of a potential war crime perpetrated by Russian forces. An example the world has not yet seen. Russian soldiers shooting two civilians in the back. CNN obtained the surveillance video taken from this vehicle dealership that sits along the main highway to Kyiv. The video is from the beginning of the war, as Russians tried and failed to shell their way to the capital. The fight along this road was clearly fierce. But what happened outside this business was not a battle between soldiers or even soldiers and armed civilians. It was a cowardly, cold-blooded killing of unarmed men by Russian forces. The soldiers show up and begin breaking in. Inside of a guard shack, two Ukrainian men prepare to meet them. We track down the men's identities. One is the owner of the business, whose family did not want him named. The other was hired to guard it.
My father's name is Leonid Alexeyevich Platz.
His daughter Yulia wanted the world to know his name and what the Russians did to him. Both civilians, both unarmed. We know this because the video shows them greeting and getting frisked by the Russian soldiers, and then casually walking away. Neither seemed to suspect what was about to happen. That is what a member of the civilian fighting force who talked to the men a couple of days before the attack told CNN. He did not want to be identified for security reasons.
We came there earlier, warned people to leave that place. We also hope for the humanity of Russian soldiers. But unfortunately, they have no humanity.
You see the two men walking in the shadows toward the camera. Behind them, the soldiers they were just talking to emerge. A few more steps, and their bodies drop to the ground. Dust shoots up from the bullets hitting the pavement. The soldiers have opened fire. Minutes later, the guard, Leonid, gets up, limping but alive. He manages to get inside the guard booth to make a call to the local guys for help. This is one of those guys, a Ukrainian truck driver turned civilian soldier.
First of all, we felt a big responsibility. We knew we should go there because a man needed our help. He was still alive.
He's the commander of a ragtag team of civilians who took up arms to fight for Ukraine and tried to save the men. When the guard called them, he explained what transpired with the soldiers. He said the soldiers asked who they were and asked for cigarettes, then let them go before shooting them in the back. When his men finally got to Leonid, he had lost massive amounts of blood.
One man from our group went there and the guy was still alive. He gave him bandages, tried to perform first aid, but the Russians started shooting.
They tried to fight back, but were unsuccessful. They didn't have the firepower to save their countrymen.
Yulia, have you seen the video?
I can't watch it now. I will save it to the cloud and leave it for my grandchildren and children. They should know about this crime and always remember who our neighbors are.
Her neighbors to the north, these Russian soldiers, showed just how callous they are, drinking, toasting one another, and looting the place minutes after slaying the two men.
What were the last words that you remember he said to you?
Bye-bye, kisses, say hello to your boys.
Her boys will be left with a terrible, lasting memory, the death of their grandfather, now being investigated as a war crime by prosecutors.
So we know that war brings appalling things. I have one question. Yeah. Having watched that video and listened closely to your report, why? Why would they do it?
Yeah. You know, there can be a lot of speculation, but as we heard, all that they were asked is, could they bum some cigarettes from these two civilians who they came upon and tried to take over their building? The civilians did not try to fight back. They did not have weapons on them. And the answer to why is a question, an answer I don't have, but I will say this. It appears that there was just an absolute disdain for human life, and they just decided that they were going to take it that day for no good reason at all. Richard?
Sarah Seidner, thank you. In the awfulness of war, we can become very immune to these things, but it's important we don't. The stories making headlines around the world I want to bring to your attention. China's dismissing criticism from Western leaders after Hong Kong police arrested a 90-year-old former bishop who's an outspoken critic of China's Communist Party. Cardinal Joseph Zen and 3 other well-known pro-democracy activists were arrested with him. They're out on bail. They're charged with colluding with foreign forces. If convicted, they could face life in prison. Thousands of people turned out in Ramallah to remember the Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot and killed whilst covering an Israeli military operation in the West Bank city of Jenin. The Palestinian Authority has rejected an Israeli offer for a joint investigation into the killing, saying it will investigate alone and share its findings with the international community. North Korea has publicly confirmed an outbreak of COVID-19 for the first time. Officials say they've detected the Omicron variant in Pyongyang after dubiously claiming for 2 years they were COVID-free. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered a strict nationwide lockdown with the distribution of medical supplies. Coming up, soaring inflation. Market sell-offs and now fears of an all-out recession. Professor Rogoff will be with us. The Harvard economics professor joins me to try and put some interpretation into all of this. And later on, an unlikely place of refuge, I'll be talking to the boss of a winery in Moldova that's welcoming thousands of refugees from Ukraine. So, welcome back. The markets will open in about 8 minutes from now, and the futures are pointing to a lower open. I don't really think we need to worry about the Dow or the S&P as much as the Nasdaq, because that's showing a loss of 1.5%, and the index is down 27% so far this year. We've got numbers on inflation which have come out. The factory gate wholesale inflation still at record highs. Year on year, 11% gain. So it's down just a tad from 11.2%. The issue, of course, is how much of that 11% passes on to consumers. Well, we know CPI is around 8.5%, which means both consumers are paying more and producers are having to eat in the margins of their profitability as well. All of this, global concerns on the growth. The UK is reporting its economy contracted last month. The BOE, the Bank of England, has already said that Britain is on track for a recession. Ken Rogoff's with me, Professor of Economics and Public Policy at Harvard. Now, Ken, we can have a sort of an academic discussion over whether or not there will be a technical recession in the United States or not, but that ignores the reality that we are in an environment of stagflation.
Oh, it's an extremely difficult global situation. Richard, I was talking to a bunch of professional forecasters the other day, and one after another said they can't remember an environment where it was this uncertain. The lockdowns in China on top of an already fragile economy, war in Europe, galloping inflation in the United States. You have the makings of a perfect storm global recession. It's a risk. It's not a certainty, but it's a pretty scary risk.
Okay, now, and into this maelstrom, we have the markets falling sharply, which in itself makes sense because, you know, they were overvalued, so you had froth off the top, but we actually have a major repricing of risk at the moment.
No question about that, particularly with the tech stocks in the United States, which are exceptionally sensitive to interest rates. They've actually benefited incredibly from the trend decline in interest rates that have steadily been going down for decades. On the way up, they're going to really hurt. So yes, markets they should be thinking about risk. China was something everyone counted on. They didn't even have a recession during the financial crisis. Even during COVID in the first year, they grew. But now we've learned they haven't grown out of it.
So policymakers are focusing on inflation. I mean, we can have an academic argument of whether they are behind the curve and should have started moving late last year, but that's a done deal now. In your view, at the moment, is the right focus to squeeze inflation out of the system, regardless of the collateral damage that's going to happen elsewhere?
Absolutely not. I mean, and I think in the end, they're going to pull up short. It's true that if they wanted to really just wring inflation out of the system, and here we're talking especially about the United States, where particularly the last year and a half has just had too much stimulus too late. The inflation is just way too high. It's not getting under control. It would be nice to have it under control, but just how big a recession do you want to tolerate on top of so many other things? I suspect that they'll end up in 2 years having raised interest rates to 3 or 3.5%. But the point is, it won't have been enough to stop inflation. It'll cool it off, but they won't want to, have an epic recession. I'm not even sure they can pull that off.
Okay, but let's just take that. Let's say rates go, to 3.25%, 3.5%, and inflation is tamed, so we get it down to 4.5%. What do you do then? Do you continue pertinaciously for your asymmetric 2%, or do you basically say we'll live with this for the foreseeable?
Well, I mean, if it's still up at 5%, they're in deep, deep trouble. I think it'll be a little close, 3.5%, 4%. And I think what they're gonna start saying is, well, we see it's going to be down at 2% in another couple of years, and we don't want to rush, and they'll, just push things back. It's a very difficult situation. Frankly, if China keeps throwing out problem after problem. It's not easy to dig our way out of this.
We said at the time that the low interest rates were going to cause problems in the future because there wouldn't be any bullets left to fire if we got into a recession. We're not sort of in that situation, are we? We're actually about to have not a demand-led recession or even a supply. We're about to have a manufactured recession by higher interest rates.
Well, it isn't just that. I mean, you know, it's what's going on everywhere. There's both a supply problem and a demand problem. Let's understand that when the Biden administration came in, no one knew what to do. I'm not saying, you know, we know what should have been done. It's not clear, but now we know they were pouring buckets of fuel on the fire with the inflation fire, with these massive stimulus. And that's really the situation we're in the United States. And it just takes time to dig your way out.
Professor, I'm grateful for you, sir. Thank you very much. Always good to see you. Keep yourself well. Thank you.
Good to see you, Richard.
It is CNN. There is a great deal more. The market opens just about upon us. In a moment. The horses are out of the gate and they're underway, as they say. We are well under 32,000 now, and the market rout continues. We're off 0.5%, 141 or so on the early numbers, minute 40. And let's see how the trend develops. It'll be the 6th straight day of losses, but that doesn't really tell you the tale. It's the size of the losses that's disconcerting. Disney's a major drag. It's warning of slower growth ahead. Its shares are down by around 3%. And over on the Nasdaq, well, the Nasdaq is falling more than 1%. The Nasdaq had been off 3% on Wednesday, so the triple stack will show that. And even as I'm talking, you can see the losses are developing. The natural gas prices are jumping in Europe after Russia imposed sanctions on some energy companies. Ukraine has also stopped transporting Russian gas through a major pipeline, and oil is trading above $100 a barrel as the EU tries to ban Russian oil imports. Anna's with me in London. Anna Stewart. There are so many undercurrents here that it's difficult to know where to prioritize, because you have, as I see it, China buying less because of lockdown, Russia interfering in gas supplies, but at the same time, what?
Well, at this point, having just got off the phone to Bruegel, it's a really worrying situation where we're seeing lots of little bits of disruption in different points. So whether it's the transit point suspended in Ukraine due to alleged Russian interference, whether it's the fact that Russia has issued some counter-sanctions overnight, no gas now going through a Polish section of the Yamal pipeline, although it wasn't being used much anyway because they cut Poland off from Russian gas, whether it is this counter-sanctions on German subsidiaries of Gazprom. That represents around 3% of Germany's Russian gas. They're looking for alternative supplies. But Richard, the big concern, speaking to Bruegel, isn't what's already happened, is what's potentially coming next. And that is those gas payments in rubles. Bulgaria, Poland refused to pay Russia rubles for gas. They got cut off next week, and the next week after that, that is when other European countries have to pay up.
And on this question of sanctions, listen to what Thierry Breton, the European Commissioner for the Internal Market, but obviously his finger very much on the pulse of what's happening, because I suggested to him that Europe was divided on the question of introducing sanctions for Russian oil.
It's true that today for oil, we are very close, but again, we did this. We are a continent, you know, like the US, and we have to take care of everyone. And it's true that we have two countries which are 100% dependent on oil, Russian oil. So we have to take care of them. In other words, if we apply these sanctions, we have also to propose alternative solutions to the one we need it.
At the end of the day, I always come back to this basic fact, Anna. At the end of the day, $1 billion a day is going to Russia.
Mm-hmm. 450 million euros every day from the EU going into Russian coffers. That's just for oil. Add another 400 million plus for gas as well. Everyone knows, the EU knows it's got to cut its reliance. But for countries like Hungary, and there are divisions in the EU, no matter what Mr. Breton says, they need to be compensated. They need better infrastructure. They need to know exactly where the oil and gas will come from, how it will get to them. And right now, those solutions aren't there. But Richard, I think these countries, whether or not they issue an embargo, they have to prepare right now as if they are in an emergency, as if Russian energy has been cut off. And frankly, that might at this stage mean that people need to consume less energy so they have more for winter in case there is a big shortage, a big fallout.
Make hay while the sun shines, or whatever that phrase is. Anna Stewart, grateful, thank you. The Japanese tech investor SoftBank says its funds racked up record losses last year, more than $27 billion. Paula Monica is with me. How do you lose that much money?
Yeah, it's a disaster for SoftBank, Richard. But you can lose that much money when you have bets on a lot of tech stocks that have imploded, particularly Asian tech stocks. You look at the disastrous market debut of Didi, which was a big holding for SoftBank, the Chinese ride-hailing firm, really struggling, going to be moving off of Wall Street exchanges. You have losses in companies like Grab and Coupang, and even larger, more established companies in China like Alibaba has really struggled this year in light of renewed worries about a COVID outbreak in China and just a broader meltdown in tech stock valuations. Investors are reevaluating how much these major tech companies, even the profitable ones, how much they really should be worth.
Right. So Just looking this morning, the market is open. The Nasdaq is sharply lower. It's down 1.5%. I see Apple's off 3%. Amazon's down another 1.5%. Didi, for what it's worth. I mean, you mentioned Didi. It's barely $1.50 worth now, but it's still off 2%, which is where is the thinking on where this ends?
I don't know necessarily, Richard, if we have reached the end point of the selling yet. People talk about capitulation, the proverbial blood in the streets, and as bad as these market drops have been for big tech, you don't get the sense that the selling is going to end anytime soon, especially when you look at how investors are rotating their money. Right. They're taking profits from these big tech investments over the past decade, and they are seemingly putting it in cyclical areas of the market like oil. I mean, the energy sector has been by far the biggest winner on Wall Street this year, and it seems like that's where the trend is right now. Sell tech, buy energy.
Crypto. I mean, the numbers are bad there. I particularly say Bitcoin. We've been told the idea that Bitcoin is somehow a hedge against inflation seems to have gone out the window.
Yeah, Bitcoin clearly, Richard, is not turning out to be digital gold. Gold is still the real thing, if you will. And the dollar has been spiking this year. That has hurt Bitcoin. And I think at the end of the day, people realize that Bitcoin is a highly skeptical asset, asset that is very risky. And I think people are skeptical of this notion that it can be digital gold. It doesn't really correlate with gold and other commodities as much as it does with tech stocks. And we've seen what's happened, obviously, with the Nasdaq, and Bitcoin, Ethereum, other cryptos are plunging as well. And what's really more alarming is that you have all of these stable coins, so-called stable coins that are pegged to the US dollar, that have also been starting to drop. You've seen this problem with a currency called Terra. My colleague Allison Morrow has a great explainer up on CNN Business right now about the problems with these stable coins. So there is a lot of turmoil in crypto right now, and I don't know where we hit bottom.
Paul LaMonica, I'm grateful, sir. Thank you. As we continue, you and I, finding sanctuary where you might not expect it. A winery in Moldova is opening its doors to Ukrainian refugees. In a moment. Nearly 6 million people have been forced from Ukraine since the beginning of the war. Many have headed to Poland, of course, and other neighbouring countries, such as Moldova. That's where thousands have been able to take refuge in a beautiful but unlikely place, a winery. The Purcari Wineries is only a few miles from the border with Ukraine. It's opened its doors to more than 5,000 refugees since the invasion began. The chateau has been producing wine for almost 200 years. It's won major medals from Decanter and other international bodies, and it has produced what it calls a freedom blend following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014. It mixed grape varieties from Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. The chief operating officer says it's his duty to help the people of Ukraine, calling them heroes. He's Eugen Commandant. He's joining me now from Moldova. So let's start with the efforts that you're doing to help people, to house refugees. How's it going?
Hi, Richard, and thanks for having me. Well, of course, from the morning of the 24th of February, when all this situation started in Ukraine, all of us here in Moldova, we woke up, we looked at our phones, and we realized that there's a war in Ukraine right across the border. We, the team at Purcari, of course, we had an emergency meeting very early in the morning, and we put the risk of the Russian troops invading Moldova aside, and we knew straight away that we had to focus on helping the Ukrainian refugees that are fleeing this war. Chateau Purcari is right next to the border, as you said. In fact, from the vineyards of Chateau Purcari, you can see the hills and valleys of Ukraine. So positioned very close to the border, we knew that we had to help. So straight away, we made a decision, and we made it public through various Ukrainian social media channels that the doors of Chateau Purcari are open to any refugee that seeks shelter and accommodation. However, I hope everyone realizes that we were within an hour, the chateau was fully booked. In fact, within a few hours, we were already improvising beds in the restaurant area and conference room. Yeah. So then from there, yeah.
So you have these thousands of refugees. To the extent that you're able, and not because of the refugees, I'm talking about just the situation generally. You talked about the Russian risk of invasion of Moldova. We know that there is already agitation by Russia. They're meddling around Moldova. Do you fear that that Moldova's next?
We cannot exclude the risk completely. But I personally do not fear, and so does the management and most of the people here in Moldova. Because if you look at the Moldovan population, there hasn't been an emigration from the country so far. And there's a few reasons why we believe it so. The neutrality of Moldova has been included in the constitution in 1994. So in fact, Moldova would not be there to join any large alliance such as NATO. Then if we were to look even at the narrative that the Russian regime has used to invade Ukraine, it was the denazification and demilitarization. Well, we don't have any Nazi parties in Moldova, and we may have some amazing wines, but we definitely do not have any tanks or heavy military equipment. So from that perspective, we believe that there shouldn't be a platform for Russia to enter Moldova. The Transnistrian region, that is something else, because Transnistria has been a territory with Russian troops on it since 1992. And you mentioned the Purcari Freedom Blend wine that we've launched in 2014 after 3 countries, the post-Soviet Union countries, have had to endure Russian aggression. It was Moldova in 1992 in Transnistria. Then in 2008 it was Georgia. And then in 2014 Crimea, and Ukraine again in 2022.
Right, so I just want to talk about your wine, because obviously your ability to help others is dependent on your ability to sell your splendid wines. We've been reading about them, and they are well known and much loved. So do you expect, with everything that's going on, will you get a good crop, and will you be making a good wine this year?
Well, look, Purcari has been making great wines since 1827. In fact, already in 1878, one of the flagship Negri di Purcari won the gold medal in Paris. So that was quite some time ago. We are certain on the quality of the wine that we make, but I want to make it clear that our support to the Ukrainian refugees is completely unconditional. So we were clear from the start that we do not want to put any commercial aspect into the humanitarian issue. So everything that we do for the Ukrainian refugees is totally unconditional. We are in the process of creating the Purcari Foundation, which will help because we are a company for profit. We're in fact a publicly listed company, listed on the Bucharest Stock Exchange. So it will help a company like us to channel funds because we have many donors and many parties that are willing to donate, and they've seen everything that we've done for this crisis, for helping the Ukrainian refugees, and that Purcari Foundation will help us in doing that.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to getting a bottle or so of the wine, and we'll have a taste of it. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us and for the excellent work that you're doing and for bringing us up to date. I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Pleasure.
The markets are open. The news is not particularly good, and the economic news in the United States on inflation, that's not good either. We'll talk about it after the break. Welcome back. I need to check the markets with you, if you will. We are bouncing off the lows of the session. The Nasdaq's still off around 1%. The trading is volatile. The reason, of course, is the numbers on inflation. This time it was wholesale inflation at the factory gate, and it's rising at a rate of 11% year over year last month. So the headline's marginally higher than expected. It's close to record levels. It follows on from, of course, the CPI number, which again, uncomfortably high would be the best phrase, which is what the markets are reacting to this morning. It means interest rates are going up, and they're going to go up harder and faster than perhaps they had feared or hoped. You've heard a lot about inflation this morning. Prices are driven up. Small businesses with tight margins will find themselves on the thin edge of the wedge. Core inflation in the US is at a 40-year high. And those rising costs, along with a shortage of skilled workers, could spell disaster. Vanessa Yurkovich has been looking into it.
What is a French fry without a side of ketchup?
Welcome, how are you?
For Clodagh Lawless, owner of the Dearborn restaurant in Chicago, it's a huge cost savings.
Say we do 200 covers and 100 of them want an extra ketchup. That's 20, 25 cents, which doesn't seem like a lot. and multiply that by a week, by a year.
Ketchup and nearly every other ingredient used at the Dearborn has become more expensive in the last year. Inflation is pushing meat prices up 13.9%, butter up 16%, and eggs up a whopping 22.6%. Big increases for small businesses.
I thought at this stage that we would be in a better position financially, but it's been very difficult, mainly because of where we're at right now with inflation.
But some good news, perhaps. Prices rose just 0.3% last month, and food prices rose less than 1%, with energy dropping 2.7%. But an 8.3% year-over-year inflation still stings.
We're still reeling financially, to be honest, from the effects of being closed for on and off for 2 years during COVID.
And despite a strong jobs report adding 428,000 jobs in April, small businesses lost 120,000 jobs. Even with restaurateurs like Lawless raising wages, it's often still not enough in the fierce competition for workers.
We are seeing a lot of people starting with us for 2 or 3 days and then going somewhere else where they can get $2 and $3 more an hour.
Oh, that's awesome.
Salon owner Michaela Blissett Williams isn't losing employees, but she can't find more. She's also trying not to pass her increased costs to customers just yet.
What are you experiencing price increases on here as it relates to the salons?
Ooh, everything from gloves to foils, things that we need to do the service have definitely gone up. And now just with inflation, it's just some products are double digit.
What does that mean for your bottom line?
Less profitability. It's a catch-22. It's either less profitability or lose business.
She's banking on inflation continuing to cool, especially as she renovates 2 of her salons. Construction costs are up 11.7% on average in the last year.
Doubling the price of a renovation, not doing price increases, it eventually adds up, and that's when it feels very overwhelming.
Back in Chicago, Lawless says she's waiting to turn a profit again. With already slim margins, higher costs have made that an impossibility.
I thought there was a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and really it just depends on how long that tunnel is.
Now, earlier I told you Apple had been overtaken as the world's most valuable company. That's around Saudi Aramco that's now become that. But Apple is now facing an onslaught from its rival Google, and it's unveiled a slew of products that you didn't really even know I needed. There are 3 new smartphones, including 2 flagship devices, which are out later this year. Google also plans to roll out its first ever smartwatch, as well as a new tablet. Now, assuming all things go according to plan, and you like the look, there are just 227 shopping days to Christmas. Yes, I was the first person to mention Christmas and how many days we've got to go. But we've still got to get through the summer and, of course, a pretty awful market correction. That's it for the moment. Connect the World is next. I, of course, will have Quest Means Business 5 hours from now. Stay with CNN because the news never stops. Neither do we.
Finland is a regional security provider and would further strengthen NATO as a future ally.
The leaders of Finland announced they support seeking NATO membership without delay. We are live in Helsinki. And
this is the first time Ayuna has stood in this spot. Since 72 days ago, she was dragged out from the rubble here.
this woman knows that she is lucky after multiple Russian rocket attacks almost killed her. Though it is hard, she shares her story of survival with Nick Payton-Walsh. Plus, thousands of people attend the memorial procession for journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot and killed on Wednesday. Hi, Melanie Jarkos in Abu Dhabi. Hello and welcome. This is Connect the World, and we begin with NATO's message to Finland. Come on in. NATO's chief saying the country would be, quote, warmly welcomed if it applies for membership. Finland's leaders say that must happen without delay. A short time ago, the country's foreign minister told the EU that Finland in NATO would be a good security move. Take a listen.
Should Finland decide to apply, the accession of Finland would strengthen the security and stability of the Baltic Sea region and Northern Europe. Finland is a regional security provider and would further strengthen NATO as a future ally. From NATO's perspective, Finland holds solid democratic credentials that meet NATO's membership criteria and has a strong and credible national defense that is interoperable with NATO.
Well, this is a big shift for Finland, and it's been neutral since World War II, and Sweden is expected to follow its lead. Russia has warned both countries against joining NATO. Now, Britain's Defence Minister Ben Wallace sat down with my colleague Brianna Keeler a short time ago, and she asked for his take on Russian President Vladimir Putin in the wake of this rush to join NATO's embrace. Take a listen.
Before this conflict, Prime Ministers and Presidents warned him that the consequence of doing this would see probably more money on defence in the West, and what we've seen is a huge number of increases in defence budgets right across the West, so people he would consider his adversaries. He was warned he'd get more NATO, not less, and he's got 100,000 troops plus on his borders in existing NATO countries, and now he's got 2 new countries joining. All the evidence was there from 2014 when he invaded illegally and annexed Crimea, that's the consequence, and so this is his own making. And I think what's to be clear, though, because Putin always likes to try and allege that NATO is sort of some sort of independent country that goes around gobbling up other countries, people choose NATO. NATO doesn't go around choosing them. So when Sweden and Finland, countries that historically have been very neutral, are choosing to apply, if Sweden does apply, but certainly Finland has said today, to NATO, that's a real own goal by President Putin.
I know you said it's up to Putin to find his off-ramp. But is it up to the West to create some room for that?
Well, I think we must be very clear about our position on Ukraine. Our position of Ukraine and why the international community has come together to support Ukraine defend itself is that what's more important than what they do with their choice of freedom is to protect their freedom to choose their destiny, whether that's joining NATO, whether that's joining the EU, whether that's staying neutral. All those choices are for Ukraine to make. And the United Kingdom will support Ukraine in whatever choice it does, but it's not for us to dictate terms to Ukraine. And I think that's something we've got to be really clear about. I think it would be wrong to dictate how far they should settle or not settle, or whether they should settle at all. That is for those people right now who are fighting to save their country to make that choice. We all stand by them because they share our same values, and they are suffering horrendous horrors at the hands of the Russians. But what they choose to do is a matter for Ukraine.
Well, there may be a way out for injured Ukrainian soldiers holed up in the Azovstal steel plant. The Deputy Prime Minister is offering to exchange Russian prisoners of war for the safe passage of those injured troops. She says negotiations are still ongoing. The steel mill is the last pocket of Ukrainian resistance in Mariupol, which Russia has virtually destroyed. In fact, the UN Human Rights Commissioner says thousands of people have lost their lives in the city since Russia invaded. He adds more than 1,000 bodies have been recovered from the city. And take a look at these satellite pictures. It shows 2 of the pontoon bridges that Ukraine destroyed earlier this week. That's effectively stopped Russian troops from advancing in the Luhansk region. A Russian civilian has reportedly been killed on Russian soil. by cross-border shelling from Ukraine. And this is a first in the nearly 11-week-old war. Ukraine is not commenting. On the Ukrainian side in Kharkiv, it was hit hard by Russian bombs. But Ukrainian troops have recaptured several towns in the area. And according to the UK Defence Ministry, Russia has withdrawn units from the region to regroup elsewhere. One Kharkiv resident returned to see the damage and told her story to our Nick Payton-Walsh.
Sometimes places that speak only of death throw up a jewel of life. This is the first time Ayuna has stood in this spot. Since 72 days ago, she was dragged out from the rubble here. Her husband, Andrei, had been scouring it, looking for her, for 3 hours. She remembers the cupboard.
That was where I was standing.
The multiple rocket attack on this, the Kharkiv regional administration, was an early sign of the ferocious, cowardly brutality Russia would unleash on civilian targets. This is Ayuna then. She had been serving coffee and cookies to soldiers, saw a flash and curled into a ball.
I feel a physical manifestation of fear. I don't like cookies anymore. A box fell on me and I remember the smell.
She asked to step away, saying she's sick with butterflies, like she hasn't felt since before races when she used to swim professionally. Andrei picks up the story.
When I heard her voice, I was crawling across the rubble, and the emergency services were trying to kick me out. I pulled a man out and then heard her. I did not plan to leave her here.
The soldiers waiting in the corridor outside from her died. The young women in the basement below her died. Their bodies not found for 3 weeks. Yet somehow the concrete here fell, shielding Ayuna.
I knew I was alive, in pain but nothing broken, but was worried I would be left and never be heard. The first time they heard me, they started to get me out, and the second missile came, and I was properly trapped.
A rescuer eventually heard her.
Andrei got closer, and I said it was me, and he cried. They said they shouldn't lift the baton on me, but Andrei did, alone. It got easier to breathe. I was surprised as I thought I was still at ground level. The ambulance guy said, "It's your second birthday. You're alive."
Fragments of a Kharkiv now past pepper this shell, cleaning up and trying to sweep away its trauma.
I sleep with the lights on, and when there's a loud car or, God forbid, a jet plane, I brace. The nightmares that I'm again lying there and shivering cold, and that nobody hears my cries, that also stops me from sleeping.
Ayuna was born in Russia, but can no longer talk to her relatives there. She says they believe Russian state media's absurd claims this is a limited operation against Nazis.
They say it was my stupidity and that I don't need to be here. I hope when time passes our children can talk, but I can't talk to them now. Russia has lost its mind and cannot control its president. They are all each responsible, every citizen.
The story here not of ruins, loss or burial in dust, but instead of a feverish energy that burns through the building's bones, as Kharkiv gets to decide where its pieces fall now. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
And as we mentioned earlier, the war on Ukraine has dramatically changed Finland's views of the Kremlin, and Finland's president says Vladimir Putin only has himself to blame. CNN's Nick Robertson is in Helsinki with the latest.
Warm handshakes, smiles, and then a signature promising military support as Finland speeds towards requesting NATO membership.
In the event of an attack on either of us, then yes, we will come to each other's assistance
including with military assistance.
Johnson's assurance, precisely what the Nordic nation's president wants as they consider joining the transatlantic alliance.
This is a very, very good way to go forward, and we do appreciate a lot this big step.
In Parliament, where the historic vote will happen, routine business continues. Politicians cautious of stating their positions publicly, lest Russia escalate tensions.
There's this idea that the time from the final decision making towards the application and then to the joining to NATO should be as short as possible.
When the moment comes, in a plenary session of Parliament likely next week, Koskinen, a member of the PM's party, is sure the vote will carry easily.
In the plenary, the result may be around 180 out of 200 in favour of membership.
Politicians and public, for the most part, in lockstep, wanting to join NATO.
People, of course, support, especially when Russia have attacked Ukraine.
Not just the invasion of Ukraine, but a history of rocky relations with Russia, spurring many here to reassess decades of neutrality.
I have a very old father. He's 96, so he was here when we had our wars in Finland with Russia. And he's been talking about, the Russians can come anytime. And I said, oh, my father, you're back in the 40s and take it easy. And they're not, yeah, you never know what the Russians, they can always come. I said, take it easy. And now I just had to say to him, well, you were right.
In a way, Finland has been preparing for this moment for more than a generation. They've been involved in plenty of NATO and other international military operations, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Kosovo, Bosnia, Lebanon. Just last week, British troops were training here with Finnish, American and other NATO soldiers. Johnson's visit promising more of this. NATO accession, should Finland ask for it, is expected to be fast-tracked, but could still take months.
Nick Robertson is standing by for us, and he is in the Finnish capital, Helsinki. Nick, is this a done deal? I mean, we know that there's been so much discussion. It still needs to pass through Parliament, but the messaging from the leadership seems to be pretty clear.
It is. It's a done deal. There are these national steps, as the Prime Minister and the President put it in their joint statement, that they hope will happen quickly, and they're quite straightforward. The Prime Minister's party, and we already know what the Prime Minister thinks from the statement, the Prime Minister's party on Saturday morning will get together. They'll decide their view on NATO. On Sunday, the governing coalition, 5 parties, will get together. That's already very clear. Early next week, the Foreign Affairs Committee will produce its report, likely to be in the lines of the Defence Committee, which has already said recommending joining NATO. Everything is aligned for this, and we heard from that Member of Parliament in the report there, who says very clearly, overwhelming support. So this I think was the sort of the moment the big step was taken, that this discussion that's been going on and the indications that this was about to happen, that's now sort of broken cover. It's official. This is on track to happen. It will, of course, follow the constitutional process of having the Parliament vote on it.
Yeah. Nick, Russia, of course, has been saying that NATO's expansion is what forced its hand. Is Putin going to retaliate because now we've got Finland in the fray? Sweden might follow suit, and what would that mean? I know that the Finnish leadership have been very clear. This is about security issues more than anything else, and they still want to remain friends with their neighbours. And that's an important distinction, but I guess Putin is going to see it in a very different way.
He is. His spokesman has already today described the the potential move by Finland as a threat, that this is something that's not, according to Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesman, is not something that's going to bring stability to the world. We've heard from the Foreign Ministry as well in Moscow saying quite clearly that they will retaliate with military and technical means if they feel that their national security is being threatened. It's It's language that's very much on par with the Kremlin. The Kremlin saying that they will watch and see what Finland does, see how Finland, if Finland puts more military bases, more military personnel along the border, Russia will match what they perceive as happening over the border. It is the complete opposite of what President Putin set out to achieve with his invasion in Ukraine, but it is completely in line with all the warnings he had in advance that you know, by destabilizing the region, you will only make NATO presence along your border a bigger, more durable and enduring presence.
Nick Robertson, really good to see you. Thank you so much for that analysis. And coming up on Connect the World, North Korea is reporting its first official COVID infection, and we'll have more on the dire impact this could have on the reclusive nation. And a Chinese crackdown on pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong targets one of the leading Catholic figures in Asia. Welcome back. Now, North Korea has declared it's in a major national emergency after identifying its first ever COVID case. Soon after that announcement was made, Pyongyang test-fired 3 short-range ballistic missiles, a sign the emergency won't affect the country's aggressive posture. Paula Hancock has more.
This is likely the first time we've seen North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wear a mask in public since the pandemic began, ordering all cities to lock down after admitting the first COVID-19 case in Pyongyang.
We think that there have probably been cases before, but they haven't admitted them, and the fact that they've admitted them now would indicate that there's really no hiding it.
The number of cases of the Omicron variant are unknown, but North Korea is one of only 2 countries in the world believed to have delivered 0 COVID vaccinations.
Even in other settings where there's very low immunization coverage, presumably there would be higher levels of prior exposure. And so this is really a unique situation that we have in North Korea right now.
COVAX, the global vaccine sharing hub, has moved to a needs-based vaccine allocation, saying it's currently not committed any for North Korea. Pyongyang last year is believed to have rejected vaccines from China, according to the UN. China now says it is ready to provide its full support. The level of testing is low. Up until March 31st, just 64,000 people had been tested out of a population of over 25 million since the pandemic began. And health infrastructure in the country is fragile at best. Even developed health systems around the world have struggled under Omicron outbreaks.
I would imagine that in North Korea, the high levels of malnutrition may be an additional risk factor for severe disease and death associated with COVID-19 right now.
It is a population under lockdown in a country not set up for delivery of food and survival items. Extended isolation could have a serious impact on future food supply, already at a crisis in the country.
Could affect agriculture and harvest. It could affect, obviously, interior commerce within the country, the ability of the public distribution system, which is already, not working very well, to function.
As many experts wondered whether an Omicron outbreak would halt its recent run on missile and weapons tests, Pyongyang answered Thursday evening with another launch. Paula Hancock's CNN Seoul.
Right, let's get you up to speed on some other stories that are on our radar right now. Panic buying is gripping the Chinese capital of Beijing as authorities try to shut down rumors the city is heading into a lockdown. Meantime, they're recommending that nearly 20 million Beijing residents stay home during another round of COVID mass testing starting Friday. Now, the new head of government in Sri Lanka is a familiar face. Ranil Wickremesinghe was sworn in a short time ago as Prime Minister. He's held the job 5 times in the past. Now, the previous Prime Minister was forced out Monday after sometimes violent protests over the government's handling of Sri Lanka's economic crisis. Chinese President Xi Jinping is praising the victory of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in this week's elections in the Philippines. Mr. Xi said he expects China and the Philippines to stand together through thick and thin. Marcos Jr. has indicated he will seek closer relations with China. 4 pro-democracy campaigners in Hong Kong were arrested this week in what appears to be an expanding crackdown by the Chinese government. Among those arrested were a 90-year-old cardinal and a pop star. We get more from CNN's Christy Lustout.
The national security crackdown here in Hong Kong is not over. A number of prominent democracy activists, including a 90-year-old Catholic cardinal, have been arrested on charges of collusion with foreign forces. This, according to the U.S. State Department. Now, those arrested include Cardinal Joseph Zen, one of the most senior Catholic clerics in Asia, Margaret Ng, a former lawmaker and barrister, the cantopop singer and activist Denise Ho, and academic Hoi Po Kong. Now, they were trustees of the now disbanded 612 Humanitarian Relief Fund, a fund to help protesters who had been arrested during the 2019 protests. Known as the conscience of Hong Kong, Cardinal Zen is one of the most outspoken critics about the Hong Kong government and Beijing. And the Vatican has reacted to the arrest of Cardinal Zen. In a statement, the Vatican press office director says this, quote, "The Holy See has learned with concern the news of the arrest of Cardinal Zen and is following the evolution of the situation with extreme attention," unquote. The Catholic Diocese of Hong Kong has expressed extreme concern. It adds this, quote, "We have always upheld the rule of law. We trust that in the future we will continue enjoying religious freedom in Hong Kong under the Basic Law. We urge the Hong Kong police and the judicial authorities to handle Cardinal Zen's case in accordance with justice, taking into consideration our concrete human situation," unquote. The arrests have been condemned by human rights organizations as well, including Amnesty International, which called them a shocking escalation of repression. China's Foreign Ministry office in Hong Kong has dismissed criticism of the Cardinal's arrest, saying the foreign forces should know crystal clear where they have been and what they have done. The arrests come just days after the appointment of John Lee as the next chief executive of Hong Kong. Lee was the security chief of the city during the 2019 protests and the introduction of the national security law the following year. Supporters say the law ended the chaos of 2019 and restored order. It also virtually wiped out the city's opposition and civil society organizations. And these latest arrests are stoking concerns of more crackdowns to come. Christy Lustout, CNN, Hong Kong.
A day of sadness and anger in the West Bank, where thousands of people attended the memorial procession for journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. The Al Jazeera reporter was fatally shot Wednesday while covering an Israeli military operation in Jenin. Al Jazeera and the Palestinian government say Israeli forces killed her. An Israeli military spokesperson told CNN it is not yet known who killed Abu Akleh. Israel has offered a joint investigation with the Palestinians. Hadas Gold was at that memorial procession in Ramallah earlier and now joins me from Jerusalem. Hadas, we just saw some of those images, thousands of people gathered to remember Shireen. And give me a sense of who was gathered there and also, importantly, the messaging from some of the speakers.
Yeah, Eleni, right now I'm in East Jerusalem, just outside of Shireen Abu Akleh's home. This is where her family has been gathering to memorialize her, to grieve together. Along the street, we've seen Palestinian flags put up as well as posters with her face, especially a picture of her wearing that press vest. Of course, when she was shot and killed, she was wearing that protective vest that said press across from it. But earlier today in Ramallah, at the Palestinian Authority president's residence, there was a huge memorial service for Shireen, where her body was brought in with full honor guard ceremony to the Palestinian Authority president's residence. The Palestinian Authority president gave a speech, and there was probably thousands of people, not only within the residence compound itself, but also all around the streets surrounding it. Even before we heard the sirens of her motorcade bringing her body to there, we could hear the crowds chanting, including things like how Shireen was the honest voice for them and that they would always remember her. Now, the people there, it was a huge range of people. There were religious figures, there was politicians, of course, there were so many journalists, not only journalists covering the event, but journalists who were her colleagues, who were her friends. We also saw political figures, including some Arab members of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, were all in attendance there. It was a very emotional moment at times. At times, the entire place was completely silent except for the sounds of people crying. Now, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas gave a short address where he said that the Palestinian Authority will not participate with the Israelis in the joint investigation that they have offered them. Take a listen to what he had to say.
This crime is not the first of its kind. Tens of Palestinian journalists have fallen before Shireen. We hold the Israeli occupying forces fully accountable for her killing. We will not let them hide behind their crime and will not let it go unpunished. We rejected and continue to reject the joint investigation with the Israeli occupation authorities because they committed the crime and we do not trust them. We will go immediately to the International Criminal Court to track down the killers.
Now, Israeli officials say they are conducting their own investigation, but they want to do a forensic investigation. They had asked the Palestinians to share with them the bullet that killed Shireen, but the Palestinian Prime Minister has said that they will not do so. Eleni.
Yeah, Hadas, it's such an important story, one where we will, of course, be following very closely. Thank you so much for that update. Now, Ukrainian prosecutors are looking into possible Russian war crimes in at least one case. A horrifying video might provide all the evidence they need. That's next. Welcome back. I'm Eleni Jokos in Abu Dhabi, and you're watching Connect the World. Russia could see NATO expanding further along its doorstep. Finland's president and prime minister say they support joining the alliance given Russia's attack on Ukraine. NATO's chief promised a swift membership process. Moscow blasted the move as a threat. Meantime, Ukraine says it's willing to exchange Russian prisoners of war for its wounded fighters at the steel plant in Mariupol. And new images reveal Ukrainian forces have destroyed at least 2 pontoon bridges the Russians installed over a key river in the Luhansk region. Graphic and disturbing surveillance video out of Ukraine shows Russian soldiers fatally shoot 2 unarmed civilians before they ransack a business near Kyiv. Prosecutors have now opened a war crimes investigation. CNN's Sarah Seidner is in Ukraine's capital with those details for us. This video is absolutely harrowing, Sarah, to see. I guess the question is what transpired around the shooting, and do we know why they were specifically targeted?
Eleni, there are a multitude of investigations into potential war crimes going on here at the hands of Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian prosecutors are looking at so many different things, but this particular video that we obtained shows from the beginning to the end what exactly transpired here. And what you see in this video is Russian soldiers shooting 2 men in the back as they walk away unarmed. This is a stark example of a potential war crime perpetrated by Russian forces. An example the world has not yet seen. Russian soldiers shooting 2 civilians in the back. CNN obtained the surveillance video taken from this vehicle dealership that sits along the main highway to Kyiv. The video is from the beginning of the war, as Russians tried and failed to shell their way to the capital. The fight along this road was clearly fierce. But what happened outside this business was not a battle between soldiers or even soldiers and armed civilians. It was a cowardly, cold-blooded killing of unarmed men by Russian forces. The soldiers show up and begin breaking in. Inside of a guard shack, 2 Ukrainian men prepare to meet them. We tracked down the men's identities. One is the owner of the business, whose family did not want him named. The other was hired to guard it.
My father's name is Leonid Alexeyevich Platz.
His daughter Yulia wanted the world to know his name and what the Russians did to him. Both civilians, both unarmed. We know this because the video shows them greeting and getting frisked by the Russian soldiers, and then casually walking away. Neither seemed to suspect what was about to happen. That is what a member of the civilian fighting force who talked to the men a couple of days before the attack told CNN. He did not want to be identified for security reasons.
We came there earlier, warned people to leave that place. We also hope for the humanity of Russian soldiers. But unfortunately, they have no humanity.
You see the 2 men walking in the shadows toward the camera. Behind them, the soldiers they were just talking to emerge. A few more steps, and their bodies drop to the ground. Dust shoots up from the bullets hitting the pavement. The soldiers have opened fire. Minutes later, the guard, Leonid, gets up, limping but alive. He manages to get inside the guard booth to make a call to the local guys for help. This is one of those guys, a Ukrainian truck driver turned civilian soldier.
First of all, we felt a big responsibility. We knew we should go there because a man needed our help. He was still alive.
He's the commander of a ragtag team of civilians who took up arms to fight for Ukraine and tried to save the men. When the guard called them, he explained what transpired with the soldiers. He said the soldiers asked who they were and asked for cigarettes, then let them go before shooting them in the back. When his men finally got to Leonid, he had lost massive amounts of blood.
One man from our group went there and the guy was still alive. He gave him bandages, tried to perform first aid, but the Russians started shooting.
They tried to fight back, but were unsuccessful. They didn't have the firepower to save their countrymen. Yulia, have you seen the video?
I can't watch it now. I will save it to the cloud and leave it for my grandchildren and children. They should know about this crime and always remember who our neighbors are.
Her neighbors to the north, these Russian soldiers, show just how callous they are, drinking, toasting one another, and looting the place minutes after slaying the two men. What were the last words that you remember he said to you?
Bye-bye, kisses, say hello to your boys.
Her boys will be left with a terrible, lasting memory, the death of their grandfather, now being investigated as a war crime by prosecutors. And Yulia says what hurts so much is that her father was in good health. She says he had many more active years to live. They had just talked about that the week before. And here he is trying to do his duty and continue a job that he said he was going to do, and he ends up being shot and killed. Eleni.
Sarah, completely senseless loss of life. Very tragic story. Thank you so much for your time. All right, we will be back after the short break. Stay with CNN. The global film industry has remained a male-dominated field for years. One Egyptian film director says because of this, there is not enough women's perspective in television and film. On the next episode of Inside the Middle East, Mariam Abu Auf shares how she and her female colleagues are working to change that.
And action!
Director Mariam Abu Auf is calling the shots on the set of her latest project. Daughter of the late Egyptian actor Izzat Abu Auf, the film industry is in her blood.
Yalla, action!
She's known for truth-telling films with original narratives.
I love stories about real people that are depicted with real feelings and all the details, and when the filmmakers behind and in front of the camera believe what they're doing and do it with passion.
Her latest venture is a series about a doctor who falls in love with a belly dancer.
It's a very fun project. It's very different than anything I've done.
In a society and industry dominated by men, she's forged her own path as a female director.
The majority of movies are made by men, the majorities of writers are men, and directors, the majorities are men. So it's important to get women's perspective in filmmaking, simply because we don't get enough of it.
Women are finding solutions to get their voices heard. And one way is through collaboration. Mariam says the TV series Leh La is one she's most proud of. It's a telling story about adoption, a taboo topic in Egypt. A collaboration with two female writers, renowned screenwriter Maryam Naum, and newcomer Dina Nigm.
The project was, a group of women working on the project, which is very exciting, and it's nice to share experiences and to share knowledge and to share emotions and feelings too. My experience with Maryam Raouf and Maryam Naum was really amazing because they're super empowering, okay? So they trust you, they listen to your input, they take everything you say into consideration.
We cut to this shot. And then we come back here with the crane.
Maryam surrounds herself with women on most projects.
I like to have women on my team. I don't want to generalize, but from my experience, I think women have more of the attention to feelings. Of course, they get women more.
Working together as a collective voice, bringing a different perspective to the silver screen.
Astronomers have just released the first image of the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy known as Sagittarius A. This is an exciting moment. The big reveal came at a ceremony in Washington. The photograph shows a ring of light bent by the gravity of the black hole, which is 4 million times more massive than the sun. Hundreds of astronomers around the globe worked for years to capture and confirm the image using multiple satellites. This is a wonderful moment, one I'm very excited about, I have to say. Okay, so tennis superstar Naomi Osaka is starting her own sports agency. The 4-time Grand Slam champion is working with her longtime agent to launch the new venture, which they're calling Evolve. Osaka says it will focus on empowerment and ownership for athletes. And she says she wants to help athletes chart new paths and build businesses of their own. Anything you can do, I can do better. That is a tune that would perfectly fit Manchester City's performance last night. And they've leapfrogged Liverpool, and it's all down to one amazing player. Alex Thomas joins me now. Tell me who the star of the last night's game was, Alex.
Yeah, to borrow a title from a famous book and movie, we need to talk about Kevin. Yeah. Kevin De Bruyne, the Dutch superstar who's been dazzling for Manchester City for so many years, scoring not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 goals as City easily cruised to a win, whereas Liverpool, as we discussed yesterday, had rather struggled in their game. But it's still neck and neck in that title race. More to come, Eleni.
All right, Alex, we'll see you right after the short break. Stay with CNN.
Hello, welcome to CNN World Sport. I'm Alex Thomas in London. Kevin De Bruyne has been described as beyond perfect after scoring 4 goals to put Manchester City within 1 victory of virtually guaranteeing another English Premier League crown. City beating Wolves.
He's playing the last 2 or 3 months, and especially in the Premier League, have been outstanding in Champions League as well. So yeah, he has been our key man in the last part of the season, alongside for the effort for all of them. It's not just what he created and the goals and everything. So yeah, he helped us a lot with. I'm happy because always Kevin had the sense for the assists too. He was so generous and always thinking what is the best for the team. But always we try to push him. We have to win games. We have to score goals. And this year I think is the more prolific year in this sense.
Our senior sports analyst, Darren Lewis, says that instead of a potential banana skin, Manchester City's game at Wolves ended up being a launch pad towards the Premier League title.
It's theirs for the taking. 3 goals within, 23 minutes for Kevin De Bruyne last night. A 5-star performance. The 3rd time in their last 5 matches that they've scored 4 or more goals, and they are absolutely flying at the moment. Confidence sky high. I think as far as Liverpool are concerned, that pursuit of the quadruple ultimately proved their undoing. You could see the nerves getting to them 24 hours earlier, but with City, it was poetry in motion. And to see them last night, they kind of had a party on the park. Kevin De Bruyne scoring those 3 goals, Raheem Sterling scoring the other, and Phil Foden hitting the post, Sterling missing a couple of other chances, De Bruyne hitting the post. It could have been 10. And I think as far as Wolves are concerned, they had to watch, many of their fans had to watch this through their fingers. But as far as City are concerned, they will enjoy a 4th title in 5 seasons. Liverpool will not stop them now.
Yeah, I mean, if they win the next one, it's like with their goal difference, it's almost over, bar the shouting, isn't it? Do you agree with Guardiola's gushing praise of Kevin De Bruyne?
Well, Kevin De Bruyne is pure gold. He's 30 years of age. He is a guy who can score with his left, with his right. He is the dream playmaker. Last summer, around about this time, Harry Kane at Spurs was angling for that move to City. And he was very open about the fact that he had been looking forward to having the ammunition provided for him by Kevin De Bruyne. That will be Erling Haaland who will be enjoying that next season. It'll be fascinating to say, as Pep was saying a second ago, just how he does integrate Haaland into a team where you have Sterling from the left, Foden from the right, and De Bruyne loading the bullets for one of the most impressive strikers in the world. Just a couple of numbers for you. You know, I love the numbers. 20 goals so far this season for Kevin De Bruyne. He's supposed to be the playmaker, not the guy who scores the goals. And the other thing, only the 3rd quickest hat-trick in Premier League history. Again, you know, you're talking about all the wonderful strikers we've seen in the top division of English football, and this guy hits the 3rd fastest hat-trick in Premier League history. What a wonderful footballer he is.
Darren Lewis in praise of Kevin De Bruyne a little bit earlier. Now Simone Inzaghi is celebrating victory in the Coppa Italia as he nears the end of his 1st season in charge of Internazionale. They're still chasing AC Milan in the Serie A title race, but Inter now have another trophy in the bag, beating Juventus 4-2 in Wednesday's cup final, but only after these 2 goals from Ivan Perisic. In extra time, it had finished 2-2 in normal time.
That is special.
And while we wait to see what will happen over the closing week and a half of the Italian season, the Dutch Eredivisie title's already decided, with Ajax taking the crown. They thrashed Heerenveen 5-0 on Wednesday to become champions of the Netherlands for the 3rd year running. It also means a triumphant finish to Erik ten Hag's reign as Ajax manager before he heads to Old Trafford to try and rebuild Manchester United's fortunes. The Dutch side in the past hour announcing their new head coach, Alfred Schreuder, a former assistant at Ajax who has been at Club Brugge as their boss, coming in to replace Ten Hag at the Johan Cruyff Arena. The controversial new Live Golf Series and its CEO, Greg Norman, continue to make headlines. We'll explain why its rift with the PGA Tour could now be heading for the courts. Welcome back to World Sport. Golf legend Greg Norman, CEO of the Saudi Arabia-funded Live Invitational Series, says they're poised to take legal action in their ongoing standoff with the PGA Tour. He's also been heavily criticised for brushing off questions about the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi with the phrase, "We've all made mistakes." Norman was speaking at a media day for the opening tournament of the controversial new series. It starts in England next month and is looking to shake up the traditional pecking order of the global game by offering top players far more money to compete in fewer events than the PGA Tour or Europe's DP World Tour. Saudi Arabia is ploughing billions of dollars into the project, leaving Norman to face tough questions about the Arab state trying to sportswash its reputation for human rights abuses and indiscriminate killing. US security and intelligence services found that Khashoggi's murder in 2018 was sanctioned by Saudi's Crown Prince. Norman said this whole thing about Saudi Arabia and Khashoggi and human rights, talk about it, but also talk about the good that the country is doing in changing its culture. Look, we've all made mistakes, and you just want to learn by those mistakes and how you can correct them going forward. While top golfers like Phil Mickelson, Lee Westwood and Sergio Garcia are expected to take part in the LIV Golf Series, the PGA Tour is refusing to grant any release requests. That hardline stance receiving backing from some players at this week's AT&T Byron Nelson event.
I guess first thoughts would be, I kind of figured that was something that would happen. I mean, if you're playing here on the PGA Tour, playing in something that could be a rival series to the PGA Tour, being a member of our tour, it's definitely not something where we want our membership to do because it's going to harm, the tournament that we have opposite that. And, I'm sure that's why they did not release the players, because if we have, 15 guys go there and play, that hurts RBC and the Canadian Open.
Look, if you want to go, go. I mean, there's been plenty of guys that have been advocates of it and have just talked it up all the time, and they've been guys behind the scenes that are saying, I'm going, I'm doing this, and my whole thing is just go then. Stop going back and forth, or you say you're going to do this. It's you can do, everybody's entitled to do what they want.
On an earlier World Sports show, Golf Digest writer Dan Rappaport told our own Patrick Snell that although the PGA Tour has previously let players compete in Saudi Arabia on the same week as one of its own tournaments, it's taking a much tougher stance in the face of this LIV Golf threat, and it could lead to legal action.
The PGA Tour is now saying no. And if you do play in this, despite us not granting you those releases, you will be punished. And Commissioner Jay Monahan has said throughout this whole process that any player who plays in this event, which he views as the beginning of what they call the Saudi Golf Tour, which I thought it was really interesting that they referred to it as that, anybody who plays in one of those events will be suspended from the PGA Tour. He's made that really clear. And guys aren't going to be suspended just for applying. So you mentioned Phil Mickelson, Lee Westwood, Sergio Garcia is another one. These guys now have a decision to make. They can either play in this LIV Golf Investments Invitational Series, or they can continue to be a PGA Tour member in good standing. But by releasing this statement yesterday, the PGA Tour is saying you can't do both. You can't play in this tournament and at the same time be a PGA Tour member. So we're about to see a lot of guys are going to have to make decisions that they probably didn't have to expect to make for at least another month.
Does it get legal now, do you think? Where does it go from here?
I think the only winner of yesterday's news is the lawyers. I mean, both sides, I know, have outside counsel, and both sides are being told that the law is on their side. Basically, LIV Golf Investments is saying the PGA Tour players are independent contractors. You cannot tell an independent contractor where he can and can't work. And the PGA Tour is saying, no. Even though we are a 501c6, a nonprofit organization, we are well within our rights to make rules for our membership. We've done it before. It's been held up in courts before, and we're doing it again. So both sides believe that the law is on their side. It's been widely assumed that this sort of cat and mouse game was always inching toward a legal battle. I would assume that in the next coming days, we're going to see someone sue the PGA Tour, whether it's an individual player who sues them because he doesn't believe that he should be restricted from playing in the LIV Golf event, or if it's LIV Golf itself as a competitor to a monopolistic practice, they can legally sue. So both sides believe they're right. Both sides believe any sort of court battle will end in their favor. And we're finally close to seeing who's right.
A saga that's got a while to run yet, I think, before we even find out who is right, as Dan was quoting there. Eleni, back to you.
All right, Alex, thanks so much. Good to see you. We're going to a short break and more with Connect the World right after the short break.
Live from CNN Abu Dhabi, this is Connect the World.
I'm Eleni Jokos in for Becky Anderson. Welcome to Connect the World. Finland likes the look of NATO, and after seeing what Russia is doing to Ukraine, the Nordic countries' leaders say Finland must apply for membership without delay. For its part, NATO is promising a warm welcome. And Ukraine's President Zelensky has been quick to congratulate Finland on its decision. After all, it's a big shift for Helsinki, and it's been neutral since World War II. NATO's pat on the back comes one day after British Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited Finland to offer UK support. CNN's Nick Robertson bringing us the story from Helsinki.
Warm handshakes, smiles, and then a signature promising military support as Finland speeds towards requesting NATO membership.
In the event of an attack on either of us, then yes, we will come to each other's assistance, including with military assistance.
Johnson's assurance, precisely what the Nordic nation's president wants as they consider joining the transatlantic alliance.
This is a very, very good way to go forward, and we do appreciate a lot this big step.
In Parliament, where the historic vote will happen, routine business continues. Politicians cautious of stating their positions publicly, lest Russia escalate tensions.
There's this idea that the time from the final decision making towards the application and then to the joining to NATO should be as short as possible.
When the moment comes, in a plenary session of Parliament likely next week, Koskinen, a member of the PM's party, is sure the vote will carry easily.
In the plenary, the result may be around 180 out of 200 in favour of membership.
Politicians and public, for the most part, in lockstep, wanting to join NATO.
People, of course, support, especially when Russia have attacked Ukraine.
Not just the invasion of Ukraine, but a history of rocky relations with Russia, spurring many here to reassess decades of neutrality.
I have a very old father. He's 96, so he was here when we had our wars in Finland with Russia. And he's been talking about, the Russians can come anytime. And I said, oh, my father, you're back in the 40s and take it easy. And they're not, yeah, you never know what the Russians, they can always come. I said, take it easy. And now I just had to say to him, well, you were right.
In a way, Finland has been preparing for this moment for more than a generation. They've been involved in plenty of NATO and other international military operations, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Kosovo, Bosnia, Lebanon. Just last week, British troops were training here with Finnish, American and other NATO soldiers. Johnson's visit promising more of this. NATO accession, should Finland ask for it, is expected to be fast-tracked, but could still take months. Nick Robertson, CNN, Helsinki, Finland.
So, as Nick mentioned, Sweden might also be on the brink of joining NATO. And Anna Wislander joins us now from Stockholm, and she's the Secretary General of the Swedish Defence Association and the Atlantic Council's Director for Northern Europe. Really good to see you. Thanks so much for taking the time. I want you to give me a sense of where Sweden stands right now. From what we know, it's that Sweden has indicated it will announce a decision on NATO membership around the same time as Finland. Do we know any more about this?
Well, we have exciting days ahead of us. Tomorrow there will be a parliamentary report on the security situation, and on Sunday the governing party, the Social Democrats, will announce their stance on joining NATO, and we expect a shift there from not wanting to join NATO to wanting to send in an application. And actually, there are indications that already on Monday this could be possible, because in Sweden this is a government decision, and you could just have an extra meeting and basically decide that Sweden should join NATO, and there has also been an announcement of a parliamentary debate on Monday. So these are very exciting days just ahead of us.
Anna, do you have a sense of whether this is going to receive support? We spoke to the defense minister not too long ago, and he basically said that there was still a non-alignment view in Parliament, that it would still need to go through various processes. And what he also said to us, we must also see what will happen if we apply for NATO membership, the risk if we apply. Have those checks and balances occurred at this point in time?
Well, we had a visit yesterday from UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and there was a bilateral declaration of security guarantees and security support for Sweden as well as for Finland. And I would expect the same, there have been the same kind of discussions with the US. So not treaty-based, but political declarations and a lot of political and military engagement and presence here. So I think those things have been settled, basically. And also we have had within the Social Democrats and the defense minister himself just a couple of days ago saying that, you know, there are advantages with Sweden and Finland joining NATO. There will be things that we can do that to secure Northern Europe that have not been possible as long as we are outside of NATO. So there is a shift definitely among leading politicians also in Sweden. And on Tuesday, the Finnish president, Sauli Niinistö, will visit Stockholm on a state visit planned since a long time back. But that is, of course, a very important time also where we could expect perhaps joint statements from Sweden and Finland on this.
It's such an important point that you make, that there's been a shift specifically from the defense minister, who was always very hesitant. Do you feel confident that the decision will be made by Monday and that Sweden will join NATO?
I feel pretty confident on this, yes, because of the shifts and the tones that and the way it's argued, and also because Finland is actually leading the way here. Sweden and Finland's security are very much dependent upon each other. And I think that's a recognition among all leading politicians in Sweden. And since we had this announcement today of the urgency for Finland to join NATO, this is really important also for Sweden and its security. So I do expect this to happen, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that you say Finland is, and Sweden are moving in lockstep together with regards to joining NATO. You mentioned Boris Johnson's visits, and the UK has agreed to mutual security deals with both of your countries, so Sweden as well as Finland. Can you give me a sense of what this will mean for security in your countries?
Well, it means a lot, of course, because the UK is an expeditionary force. It has nuclear weapons. It is, a dominating actor in Northern Europe. So if something would happen here or a crisis would develop, UK would be here very quickly, and I expect them to be around here a lot. Already we have, through the joint expeditionary force, which the UK leads and which Sweden and Finland participate, we have practiced together hybrid scenarios already, and so there is a lot of activity and there is also a political commitment from the UK towards this area, and that's very important for us.
Yeah. Anna, very quickly, are you worried about Vladimir Putin retaliating?
Well, I think definitely there will be reactions from Russia. They have announced that they will react, and I'm sure they will in some senses. What we have seen so far has not been as much as we perhaps expected, but there is still an insecure situation ahead, and that could be anything from, cyber attacks to disinformation, electronic jamming. We have had intrusions into our airspace. And I'm sure there will be more longer term make shifts to move military installations closer to our borders, for instance, and of course react politically. I would expect that as well. But I think we have anticipated most of what could happen already and taking measures to counter that.
Anna Wieslander, thank you very much for your insights. Great to have you on the show. Now, the Kremlin is watching the NATO love in like a proverbial hawk. CNN's Nick Robertson is back with us, this time live from Helsinki. Nick, you know, I have to say, just speaking to Anna Wieslander, they're saying that Sweden will be debating this in Parliament, that it is inevitable that they will join, and importantly, walking in lockstep in terms of what Finland is doing, and they see themselves as two countries that will probably be joining the NATO alliance together.
Very much so. These are two countries that have a strong security alliance anyway. They joined the EU pretty much around the same time. There is a real sense here that this should happen together to sort of ease and just to make it easier on the NATO process internally as it reviews the accession of both countries. Obviously, both countries are individuals and individual countries and will have to be assessed on their own merits. But in terms of the process and the meetings within NATO, it makes it more straightforward. And I think this has been really the hope or the plan of both the prime ministers of both countries, because if you just go back to mid-April, the prime minister of Finland here went to Sweden to have the joint announcement that Finland was going to put forward a paper, a government paper to the parliament for debate on security and about the issue of NATO. So it's been a real effort from the get-go to be in lockstep, and it's important for both of them because neither wants to be left behind, neither wants to be exposed to whatever actions Russia may choose to take.
Yeah, and for the Swedes, quite interesting that we had spoken to the defense minister, and he had said that they still wanted to be sort of non-aligned, that was the strategy. But it seems now that there's been a huge shift, and they're taking into consideration the huge risks related to being so close to Russia.
I think, you know, politically here in Finland, they really took note late last year when, you know, when the Russians sent their security guarantees demand, if you will, that sort of 17-page document. They sent it to NATO. They sent it to to President Biden as well. And in that, they spelt out that NATO should not expand. No one else should join NATO. And both Finland and Sweden knew that meant them, and that was impinging on their sovereignty. And they knew at that moment that something had changed over the past decades of their relationship with Russia. It had been at times tense, at times more at ease, you know, with open movement across the border, very open movement across the border. But they recognized that something had changed. And then on top of that, you have the invasion of Ukraine and the assessment very, very, very sharply that Putin was in a risk-taking mode, put the two issues together, and they just couldn't stand by and take the risk themselves. And therefore, the only way to get security, the best way to get security, and as well, a lesson learned watching what happened to Ukraine. Ukraine was the object lesson that if you're not in the NATO umbrella, then NATO nations would not step into your country to support you and potentially go against Russia and everything that means. If you're outside the NATO club. So all of this became crystal clear, and that's what changed perceptions here.
All right, Nick, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be speaking over the next few days about these developments. Great to see you. Now to the conflict that has inspired Finland to break its decades of neutrality. Ukraine reports more villages in the northeast near the Russian border are coming under fire, with one community getting hit with 20 artillery shells. Still, Ukraine's military claims a number of villages are back under Ukrainian control, but still within range of Russian artillery fires. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh spoke with one woman who barely escaped a Russian missile strike.
Sometimes places that speak only of death throw up a jewel of life. This is the first time Ayuna has stood in this spot. Since 72 days ago, she was dragged out from the rubble here. Her husband, Andrei, had been scouring it, looking for her, for 3 hours. She remembers the cupboard.
That was where I was standing.
The multiple rocket attack on this, the Kharkiv regional administration, was an early sign of the ferocious, cowardly brutality Russia would unleash on civilian targets. This is Ayuna then. She had been serving coffee and cookies to soldiers, saw a flash and curled into a ball.
Какой-то жуткий страх, прямо так физически я чувствую волнение и
I feel a physical manifestation of fear. I don't like cookies anymore. A box fell on me and I remember the smell.
She asked to step away, saying she's sick with butterflies, like she hasn't felt since before races when she used to swim professionally. Andrei picks up the story.
When I heard her voice, I was crawling across the rubble, and the emergency services were trying to kick me out. I pulled a man out and then heard her. I did not plan to leave her here.
The soldiers waiting in the corridor outside from her died. The young women in the basement below her died. Their bodies not found for 3 weeks. Yet somehow the concrete here fell, shielding Ayuna.
I knew I was alive, in pain but nothing broken, but was worried I would be left and never be heard. The first time they heard me, they started to get me out and the second missile came and I was properly trapped.
A rescuer eventually heard her.
Andrei got closer and I said it was me and he cried. They said they shouldn't lift the baton on me, but Andrei did, alone. It got easier to breathe. I was surprised as I thought I was still at ground level. The ambulance guy said, "It's your second birthday. You're alive."
Fragments of a Kharkiv now past pepper this shell, cleaning up and trying to sweep away its trauma.
I sleep with the lights on, and when there's a loud car or, God forbid, a jet plane, I brace. The nightmares that I'm again lying there and shivering cold, and that nobody hears my cries, that also stops me from sleeping.
Ayuna was born in Russia, but can no longer talk to her relatives there. She says they believe Russian state media's absurd claims this is a limited operation against Nazis.
They say it was my stupidity and that I don't need to be here. I hope when time passes our children can talk, but I can't talk to them now. Russia has lost its mind and cannot control its president. They are all each responsible, every citizen.
The story here not of ruins, loss or burial in dust, but instead of a feverish energy that burns through the building's bones, as Kharkiv gets to decide where its pieces fall now. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Well, coming up, horrifying video obtained by CNN may provide evidence of a possible Russian war crime, and we'll bring you the report right after this. And the memorial procession for an Al Jazeera journalist killed in the West Bank while covering an Israeli military operation. What Palestinian leaders are saying today about her death. The honest voice never dies. Those words chanted in the West Bank today at the memorial procession for Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Al Jazeera and the Palestinian Authority say Israeli forces fatally shot Abu Akleh as she covered an Israeli military operation in Jenin on Wednesday. The network calls her death a cold-blooded assassination. An Israeli military spokesperson told CNN it is not yet known who killed Abu Akleh. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas says he will bring Abu Akleh's killing to the International Criminal Court. Hadas Gold was at the memorial procession in Ramallah earlier and joins me now from Jerusalem. Hadas, I was just looking at those images of the procession and the thousands of people that were gathered there, and also them chanting that an honest voice never dies. Tell me about the people there, and importantly, as well as the messaging of those that spoke.
So, Eleni, the ceremony took place at the residence of the Palestinian Authority president, and there were probably, I would say, thousands of people gathered both within the compound and outside on the streets surrounding the compound, and it was a wide range of people. There were officials, there were politicians, religious officials, and of course, many, many journalists, not only to cover the event, but also colleagues of Shireen's, as well as just members of the public. There are several people brought signs that called for justice. They brought pictures of her. Many people brought flowers to place upon her coffin. And there were also Arab members of the Israeli Knesset, politicians who were there as well as diplomats. And it just went to show you what an icon Shireen Abu Akleh was to this community and to people all around the world. She was such an important, not only female journalist, but just iconic journalist for so many of these people for so long. As you noted, both before and after, before her body was brought to the ceremony and as it was being taken away in a convoy of ambulances, the crowds who were both inside and outside, they began chanting things like you said. They said, "The honest voice never dies." They also said, "We sacrifice our blood and spirit for you, Shireen." Again, you could just really feel what she meant to so many people. You know, she died when she was only 51 years old. She had so many years left of reporting that she could have done. Now, during the ceremony, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas made a speech about Shireen, about her contributions, but he also made some comments about about the investigation into her death and what happened. And he said that the Palestinian Authority rejected and will continue to reject the joint investigation that the Israelis had asked for. The Israelis said that they want to do a joint investigation to figure out what had happened to her. And as you noted, he also said that they want to go immediately to the International Criminal Court. I also want to play for you what the Palestinian Prime Minister had to say about the incident as well.
We will run the investigation alone, and we'll share the findings with all the international partners, the U.S., the ICC, Qatar, and whoever is connected to this story will have a copy of the investigation file, and we will give the findings to the ICC. We do not believe in the Israeli judiciary, and we do not believe in Israeli investigations. We have seen dozens of Israeli investigations without results. The soldiers who kill are awarded or move posts.
Now, the Israelis had specifically asked, they said that they wanted to also be able to examine the bullet that killed Shireen, but Mohammed Shtayyeh, the Palestinian Prime Minister, said that they will not give the Israeli side the bullet at any cost. Eleni.
Hadas, thank you so much. And this is a story that, of course, we'll be keeping a close watch on as investigations still get underway. Thanks so much. Now, North Korea is reporting its first case of COVID-19. State media is calling it a major national emergency, and North Korea's leader has ordered lockdowns across the country. As Paula Hancock tells us, the outbreak could prove especially challenging to fight in a country with little testing and no known vaccine program.
This is likely the first time we've seen North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wear a mask in public since the pandemic began, ordering all cities to lock down after admitting the first COVID-19 case in Pyongyang.
We think that there have probably been cases before, but they haven't admitted them, and the fact that they've admitted them now would indicate that there's really no hiding it.
The number of cases of the Omicron variant are unknown, But North Korea is one of only 2 countries in the world believed to have delivered 0 COVID vaccinations.
Even in other settings where there's very low immunization coverage, presumably there would be higher levels of prior exposure. And so this is really a unique situation that we have in North Korea right now.
COVAX, the global vaccine sharing hub, has moved to a needs-based vaccine allocation, saying it's currently not committed any for North Korea. Pyongyang last year is believed to have rejected vaccines from China, according to the UN. China now says it is ready to provide its full support. The level of testing is low. Up until March 31st, just 64,000 people had been tested out of a population of over 25 million since the pandemic began. And health infrastructure in the country is fragile at best. Even developed health systems around the world have struggled under Omicron outbreaks.
I would imagine that in North Korea, the high levels of malnutrition may be an additional risk factor for severe disease and death associated with COVID-19 right now.
It is a population under lockdown in a country not set up for delivery of food and survival items. Extended isolation could have a serious impact on future food supply, already at a crisis in the country.
Could affect agriculture and harvest. It could affect, obviously, interior commerce within the country, the ability of the public distribution system, which is already, not working very well, to function.
As many experts wondered whether an Omicron outbreak would halt its recent run on missile and weapons tests, Pyongyang answered Thursday evening with another launch. Paula Hancock's CNN Seoul.
Right, coming up on Connect the World, Russians have reportedly stolen some 400,000 tons of grain from Ukraine. But where is it going?
way it can as the Russians try to take territory after territory in the eastern part of this country. As you know, in the northern part here and around Kyiv, the Ukrainians were able to fiercely fight back and push them back out of the area, but they have really, the Russians concentrated on the Donbass area, have concentrated on the eastern part of the country, and that is where you're seeing this huge onslaught of bombings and of shelling as the Russians try to take over place by place, city by city.
Sarah, and we have new surveillance video showing Russian soldiers fatally shooting 2 unarmed civilians near Kyiv. What more do we know?
Look, it is really an example of just a callous murder. And if you look at the video, what you see are 2 men who had had some sort of conversation with them and then walk away. When their backs are turned and they have walked a few steps away, that is when they are shot by Russian soldiers.
This is a stark example of a potential war crime perpetrated by Russian forces. An example the world has not yet seen. Russian soldiers shooting 2 civilians in the back. CNN obtained the surveillance video taken from this vehicle dealership that sits along the main highway to Kyiv. The video is from the beginning of the war, as Russians tried and failed to shell their way to the capital. The fight along this road was clearly fierce. But what happened outside this business was not a battle between soldiers or even soldiers and armed civilians. It was a cowardly, cold-blooded killing of unarmed men by Russian forces. The soldiers show up and begin breaking in. Inside of a guard shack, 2 Ukrainian men prepare to meet them. We tracked down the men's identities. One is the owner of the business, whose family did not want him named. The other was hired to guard it.
My father's name is Leonid Alexeyevich Platz.
His daughter Yulia wanted the world to know his name and what the Russians did to him. Both civilians, both unarmed. We know this because the video shows them greeting and getting frisked by the Russian soldiers, and then casually walking away. Neither seemed to suspect what was about to happen. That is what a member of the civilian fighting force who talked to the men a couple of days before the attack told CNN. He did not want to be identified for security reasons.
We came there earlier, warned people to leave that place. We also hope for the humanity of Russian soldiers. But unfortunately, they have no humanity.
You see the 2 men walking in the shadows toward the camera. Behind them, the soldiers they were just talking to emerge. A few more steps, and their bodies drop to the ground. Dust shoots up from the bullets hitting the pavement. The soldiers have opened fire. Minutes later, the guard, Leonid, gets up, limping but alive. He manages to get inside the guard booth to make a call to the local guys for help. This is one of those guys, a Ukrainian truck driver turned civilian soldier.
First of all, we felt a big responsibility. We knew we should go there because a man needed our help. He was still alive.
He's the commander of a ragtag team of civilians who took up arms to fight for Ukraine and tried to save the men. When the guard called them, he explained what transpired with the soldiers. He said the soldiers asked who they were and asked for cigarettes, then let them go before shooting them in the back. When his men finally got to Leonid, he had lost massive amounts of blood.
One man from our group went there and the guy was still alive. He gave him bandages, tried to perform first aid, but the Russians started shooting.
They tried to fight back, but were unsuccessful. They didn't have the firepower to save their countrymen.
Yulia, have you seen the video?
I can't watch it now. I will save it to the cloud and leave it for my grandchildren and children. They should know about this crime and always remember who our neighbors are.
Her neighbors to the north, these Russian soldiers, showed just how callous they are, drinking, toasting one another, and looting the place minutes after slaying the 2 men.
What were the last words that you remember he said to you?
Bye-bye, kisses, say hello to your boys.
Her boys will be left with a terrible, lasting memory. The death of their grandfather, now being investigated as a war crime by prosecutors.
Yulia is hoping that there will be some kind of justice, though she knows there is nothing at all that can bring her father and her children's grandfather back. But we do know now that investigators are at this very moment trying to identify those Russian soldiers. They have seen the entire video and they're trying to identify them to try and find them, capture them, and bring them to justice. Back to you.
Yeah. Sarah, frankly, appalling and shocking video. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us. Right, Russian forces are stealing farm equipment and thousands of tons of grain from Ukrainian farmers in occupied territories. This may threaten this year's harvest in one of the world's most important grain-producing countries. At least one ship carrying stolen grain has been turned away from ports in Egypt and Lebanon and is now in the Syrian port of Latakia. These images obtained by CNN show the Russian vessel docked there. CNN has identified the bulk carrier as the Matros Pozinich. The ship departed from the main port in Crimea 2 weeks ago. It is one of 3 ships involved in the trade of stolen grain, according to open source research and Ukrainian officials. The Ukraine Ministry of Defense says an estimated 400,000 tons of grain have been stolen. The UN Secretary General says he is deeply concerned about the risks of widespread hunger due to the interrupted food supply caused by the war.
I do believe that there is no solution for the problem without bringing back to the market the food production of Ukraine and the food and fertilizer production of the Russian Federation and Belarus.
And he's called for quick and decisive action to ensure the steady flow of food supplies to the international market. Now, before the invasion, Ukraine accounted for nearly 9% of wheat exports worldwide, as well as 16% of maize exports and 42% of sunflower oil. Food is not the only essential commodity affected by the war. Energy prices are being impacted as the West tries to loosen its dependence on Russia. Russian state energy giant Gazprom says it has stopped using a key European pipeline because that line runs through Poland. The Yamal line, shown here in green, runs from Russia through Belarus and Poland before reaching Germany. Russia and Poland have been fighting over gas for several weeks. CNN's Anna Stewart is following the story. Anna, I want you to walk us through what we're seeing right now, the disruption, whether this has got to do with sanctions, whether we're seeing actual pipeline issues coming through. It seems that the relationships are deteriorating, and now that is impacting gas supply.
Yes, and a lot of what we've seen just in the last 24 hours relates to a presidential decree from President Putin, which is essentially in retaliation to general sanctions against Russia from the West. And it is targeting, as you mentioned, the Polish part of the Yamal pipeline. Gazprom will not be sending any gas through there. Limited impact there simply because Poland is already cut off from gas from Russia, and there wasn't much flowing through that pipeline anyway. Also targeted are current or former Gazprom subsidiaries in the West, and the biggest is actually Gazprom Germania in Germany. Germany took control of that over a month ago, and it relates to all sorts of gas supply, from transmission to storage of gas. Gazprom will not be sending that gas. Now, looking at how much that accounts for, it's around 3% of Germany's Russian gas. Again, not huge. And the German foreign minister today said they are looking for alternative supplies. Currently, their supply is stable. But add that to what we saw yesterday, Eleni, we were talking about it, the Ukraine transit point, a really major one, suspended because Ukraine alleges that Russian forces are interfering and stealing gas. That has also reduced gas supply. So Germany said that their gas supplies via Ukraine were down 25% yesterday. They've made that up with supplies from Norway and the Netherlands. But what we're seeing here essentially is drab of disruptions that we weren't really seeing in weeks gone past. And the little bit of gas here and a little bit of gas there may not impact households' heating right now or business operations, given we're in spring and heading into summer, but it will limit how Europe puts gas into storage. And that is absolutely critical as it tries to insulate itself from further disruption from Russia, wean itself off Russian gas, and get ready, frankly, for winter.
And I tell you, maybe a small supply constraint that is emerging that could be part of a wider macro issue. but it's also going to impact sentiment and perception. I mean, looking at the oil price right now, it's above $100 a barrel. It's rising. WTI crude also rising. That is going to stoke inflation. And here's the big question, Anna. We know that Russia is in desperate need of the revenues it gets from gas, but at the same time, it has this ability to really put a further noose around European countries. And as we've ascertained, the relationship is deteriorating, and it seems that they are willing to pull the plug where it suits them.
And that is the biggest concern, because the EU has made clear it's looking at banning Russian oil, although not all of its members agree. It is not ready to be done with Russian gas. It is far too reliant on it. And I can show you what gas prices did this morning on the back of all of this news. They spiked 14% in terms of European gas futures. That is worrying. And it's not just on the disruption we were just talking about. It's the fear of what comes next. And the biggest one, Eleni, is we talked about Poland no longer having gas supplies, or Bulgaria. They won't pay for their gas in rubles. Other countries, other suppliers around Europe have payments due next week. If they don't pay for it in rubles, what happens next? Eleni?
Such a good question, Anna. I think we're going to be talking about this for quite some time to come. Thanks so much. And coming up, a heartwarming homecoming and some unexpected new neighbours on New Zealand's South Island. That's all coming up.
ago by hunting, New Zealand sea lions survived on sub-Antarctic islands until one day in 1993.
A female from the Auckland Islands had a pup here on the mainland, and she proceeded to have 11 pups. So essentially this one female was responsible for bringing back a population of sea lions to Otago.
That pivotal sea lion was named Mum. She left behind a dynasty of sea lions that continues to thrive on this coast today. But they don't just stick to this coastline.
They really push inland as far as they can, and that usually puts them up against a road. You take care around those roads. And so actually one of the biggest threats are some of those modes of transport.
The sea lions have returned to a very different coastline to the one they left over 100 years ago. One with crowded beaches. Keeping them safe is the job of biodiversity ranger Jim Fife.
Humans love to go to the beach at summer. Sea lions like to breed on the beaches at summer.
The young sea lions are really curious and playful. They know that the surfers are there having fun as well, and so they want to join in. They're, social animals. Our advice is that you just don't interact with them, just ignore them and get on with what you're doing.
Hello.
Despite their recovery here, New Zealand sea lions are one of the world's rarest sea lion species, facing threats from disease and accidental capture in local fisheries. That makes protecting this burgeoning population even more important. And that's where local residents come in.
Communities usually, once they start to learn about them, take a real interest and are really protective of the sea lions that are breeding in their communities.
Squeeze through there, come on.
People are just surprised to find these animals in their backyard.
This year, 21 sea lion pups were born on the Otago Peninsula, Fife says. It's the highest number since they returned to these shores and will keep sea lion babysitters like Yeardley busy for years to come.
It's very cool because you're going to get to see their weird faces again. Once you get to know them, sea lions do have personalities. It's just seeing them, enjoying them, while respecting their space, of course. That's the thing that I enjoy the most.
Just adorable. Well, let us know what you're doing to answer the call with the hashtag Call to Earth. We'll be right back after the short break. It has fascinated mankind for years, and now we're getting our first image of the supermassive black hole in the center of our Milky Way. It's called Sagittarius A star. And this image was years in the making, captured by the Event Horizon network of telescopes. And it was unveiled by an international team of scientists earlier today in Washington. Let's bring in Leah Medeiros. She is one of the astronomers who helped make this remarkable discovery possible. She joins us now live from Washington. I am so super excited about this. I'm completely revealing my tendencies to watch what you guys at the Event Horizon Telescope are doing. And I remember the photograph that was released in 2019 of M87, and so excited about Sagittarius A star. How are you all feeling, and how long did it take you to get this spectacular image?
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'm very excited to talk with you today. We are really thrilled, a little relieved also. It has been a lot of work over many, many years. The Sag A star image that we published today, we actually took that data at the same time that we took the data that was published for the M87 image. So we've had the data since 2017. So it took, that amount of time until today to publish that image. There are several reasons why Sag A star is a little more complicated to image than M87, but we are all very, very excited to finally be able to share with everybody what the black hole at the center of our galaxy looks like.
Very exciting. I mean, this one is only 26,000 light years away, M87 55 million light years away. I want you to tell me how many telescopes it took to take this image.
Yes, so in 2017, we observed with 8 telescopes at 6 different locations. And so all of these telescopes worked together like a team, and everybody looked at these sources at the same time, and everybody worked together to create a Earth-sized telescope so that we could create such a incredibly high-resolution image.
Yeah. Also, okay, what have we learned about black holes since M87 was taken, now specifically Sagittarius A star? Because that is sort of the big question. What do black holes do, and what does it mean for us?
Yes, so that is a wonderful question, and is something that I'm very personally involved in. So I'm working primarily on the testing gravity part of this collaboration. And so we have a paper that came out today that talks about what we can learn about black holes and what we can learn about gravity as a whole from this new image. So that's really, really exciting. It's a really remarkable new test of gravity. It's the first time we were able to test gravity with this mass. We've never been able to test it at such a high precision for a black hole of this mass. And one of the things that we look into in this paper is whether or not this object has an event horizon. So black holes, according to the theories that we have right now, in particular Einstein's theory of gravity, they are predicted to have what's called an event horizon, which is a boundary of no return. So we look into whether or not we can prove if this black hole has an event horizon. And we can actually rule out almost every alternative to an event horizon. So that is something really exciting that's new, that we can actually show that it really should have an event horizon.
And that is really exciting to me too. I have to say, how does it make you feel that you're helping, prove and confirm Einstein's theory of relativity and the work that Stephen Hawking has done, and all of you young scientists working on this incredible project?
Yes, so I actually work at the Institute for Advanced Study, which is the same institute where Einstein spent the later part of his career. And so it feels really incredible, and I have to pinch myself sometimes I'm in the same buildings where he himself worked, and we're still testing his theory over 100 years later, and he's still right over 100 years later. It's really remarkable. It's very humbling for sure, and we're just all so incredibly excited that we were finally able to share this result with everyone.
Well, nerds like me are watching you very closely and feeling very proud of all of you today. Thank you very much, Leah. Great to see you. And thank you so very much for joining us at home. That was Connect the World. CNN continues after this short break. Stay with us.
Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher in New York, and this is One World. Finland joining NATO seems all but certain, and that's drawing direct, heated rhetoric from Russia. Part of the reason, the more than 1,200-kilometer border Russia shares with Finland. The Kremlin sees that increased NATO presence as a threat, and is of course making that very clear. Should this happen, Russia will react. In a statement today, Russia's foreign ministry wrote, Russia will be forced to take retaliatory steps, both of a military technical nature and other nature as well, in order to stop the threats to its national security that arise in this regard. But Finnish leaders watching war play out in Ukraine say their goal is to strengthen security in the region.
Should Finland decide to apply, the accession of Finland would strengthen the security and stability of the Baltic Sea region and Northern Europe. Finland is a regional security provider and would further strengthen NATO as a future ally. From NATO's perspective, Finland holds solid democratic credentials that meet NATO's membership criteria and has a strong and credible national defense that is interoperable with NATO.
CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson has more from Helsinki.
Warm handshakes, smiles, and then a signature promising military support as Finland speeds towards requesting NATO membership.
In the event of an attack on either of us, then yes, we will come to each other's assistance, including with military assistance.
Johnson's assurance, precisely what the Nordic nation's president wants as they consider joining the transatlantic alliance.
This is a very, very good way to go forward, and we do appreciate a lot this big step.
In Parliament, where the historic vote will happen, routine business continues. Politicians cautious of stating their positions publicly, lest Russia escalate tensions.
There's this idea that the time from the final decision making towards the application and then to the joining to NATO should be as short as possible.
When the moment comes, in a plenary session of Parliament likely next week, Koskinen, a member of the PM's party, is sure the vote will carry easily.
In the plenary, the result may be around 180 out of 200 in favor of membership.
Politicians and public, for the most part, in lockstep, wanting to join NATO.
People, of course, support, especially when Russia have attacked Ukraine.
Not just the invasion of Ukraine, but a history of rocky relations with Russia, spurring many here to reassess decades of neutrality.
I have a very old father, he's 96, so he was here when we had our wars in Finland with Russia. And he's been talking about, the Russians can come anytime. And I said, oh, my father, you're back in the 40s and take it easy. And they're not, yeah, you never know what the Russians, they can always come. I said, take it easy. And now I just had to say to him, well, you were right.
In a way, Finland has been preparing for this moment for more than a generation. They've been involved in plenty of NATO and other international military operations, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Kosovo, Bosnia, Lebanon. Just last week, British troops were training here with Finnish, American and other NATO soldiers. Johnson's visit promising more of this. NATO accession, should Finland ask for it, is expected to be fast-tracked, but could still take months. Nick Robertson, CNN, Helsinki, Finland.
My next guest served as the head of policy planning for two successive NATO Secretaries General. Fabrice Pothier joins me live now from Santander, Spain. Fabrice, thank you so much for being with us. So the seed for Finland joining NATO was planted 8 years ago, back in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea. But they've always tried to maintain not necessarily neutrality, but at the very least, they've always wanted to be militarily non-aligned. Of course, the war now in Ukraine changes that calculation. Give us your thoughts.
Exactly. I think there was already some thinking going on, some serious thinking going on in Helsinki since 2014, 2015. but the politics were not fully aligned to make the jump into the NATO membership. And with Putin's second war of aggression against Ukraine, it's pretty clear that the only way, the only safe place for a country like Finland, but also Sweden, is to be part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Because just in terms of popularity for joining NATO, in Finland at first, or rather around 8 years ago, it was around 20-30%. Now it's very high at 70%. In terms of how Russia is going to react to this, the statement from Russia's foreign ministry basically says Russia will be forced to take retaliatory steps. Of course, we would expect that, both of a military technical nature and other nature as well, other ways as well. What do they mean by other ways? How might they retaliate in other ways?
Well, I guess they are doing their usual game of ambiguity and letting us guess what their next move will be. But you can assume that they might do some, indeed, troops or forces deployment by the Russian-Finnish border as a way to exert some sort of pressure. You could also imagine some hybrid scenario where they might launch some cyber attacks. But what we all know is that Finland is actually a pretty capable cyber power. So Finland will not be vulnerable and will be capable of protecting itself and possibly responding.
And we also know that, of course, Russia and Finland share a border about 800 miles long. What happens? Because obviously, between applying to become a NATO member and actually becoming a NATO member takes time. We saw with North Macedonia that it actually took many, many years. What happens if there is some kind of provocation by Russia in the interim?
First, I think this is a very unique kind of accession process, because here you have an extremely capable country, Finland, and possibly Sweden also, where they don't have to comply with all the reform process because they are basically fit for purpose. And they're already member without being legally member. So it's more a legal process. The legal process essentially is that all the NATO parliaments, including the US Congress, have to register their membership. And I guess what will happen in between their declaration of membership and the fact that they're full-fledged member is you are going to have countries like the US and also the UK providing some bilateral security guarantees to each country, saying we will cover your back in case of a major crisis or Russian attempt.
And in terms of what Finland's membership to NATO means for the actual alliance, what does it mean for the alliance? How much does it strengthen the alliance, do you think?
Well, I think it's a boost and it's a win-win at several levels. It's a political boost because it's a show of unity for the Euro-Atlantic family. We have now 2 new members in a region which is really critical if you want to deter Russia properly, because the Baltic region is a critical region also for Russia. So to have Sweden and Finland will be a big boost politically in terms of showing a very unified family inside the NATO tent. It's also a big boost for the defense posture of the alliance, because also one needs to remember that Finland will bring some serious capabilities to the table, some serious land forces, but also it's one of those countries that is part of the F-35 club, which means it has a very capable air force.
And just, thinking about this from Vladimir Putin's perspective, this is exactly what he did not want to happen. I mean, Finland has not just tried to be militarily non-aligned, but they've also actually tried to maintain somewhat civil relations with Russia. Vladimir Putin has essentially brought this on himself.
Exactly. He's like stuck in his own Freudian loop where he pretends to do something to prevent something else from happening, and it triggers that something else. And in this case, it's actually the expansion or consolidation of NATO. But what's very important to note is that this is a defensive alliance. NATO is not interested in invading its neighbors. The problem is Vladimir Putin keeps on invading its own neighbors, and that's why we have to take those steps. And my bet is that Finland and Sweden inside NATO is actually a greater guarantee of peace and stability than outside, where Putin could be tempted to go after them.
Right. Fabrice, live for us, thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure.
Finland's intention to join NATO isn't the only setback facing Russian President Vladimir Putin. On the battlefield, Moscow's army is losing ground in a Ukrainian counter-offensive that's taking back towns and villages north of Kharkiv. Drone and satellite images show that twice in the past 24 hours, Ukraine stopped Kremlin forces from crossing a key river by destroying pontoon bridges. Britain's defense ministry says that Moscow's prioritization of the Donbass has left its forces in the northeastern region vulnerable to counterattacks by Ukrainian troops. But as fighting in the northeast moves closer to the border and Russian supply lines, Ukraine says more villages are coming under fire. Kyiv is acknowledging that Moscow has achieved partial success in the east. One official says the situation along the front lines in the Luhansk has deteriorated significantly, and it's civilians who are paying the highest price. In northern Ukraine, 3 people were killed after 2 schools were shelled by Russian forces. CNN's Melissa Bell joins us live now from Kyiv. So, Melissa, Ukrainian forces, though, the soldiers really ramping up counter-offensive measures. What more do we know at this point?
That's right, and it began earlier this week. You'll remember those 4 towns, villages taken to the north of Kharkiv, between Kharkiv and the Russian border. President Zelensky had described it as a turning point. He felt that the momentum that this has played meant that we might be seeing a turning point in this war. And certainly some of that renewed violence we've seen along the border seems to suggest that that could be correct. We'd heard yesterday that Ukrainian authorities had spoken about the fact that Russia had massed some 20 tactical battalion groups across the border in the Belgorod region. We've just heard, perhaps as a confirmation that this counteroffensive is having some impact, that we've had the first Russian civilian death as a result of cross-border shelling in that same region, suggesting that Ukraine is managing to push back. But you're quite right, that also means renewed fighting along all that northern border for Ukraine as well. Not only in the Kharkiv region, but next door in the Sumy region. As you mentioned, there was one village hit by about 20 rounds of artillery fire this morning, with 1 person killed. And again, further along the border westwards in the region of Chernihiv, there was that attack spoken about on Telegram by the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, who spoke of 3 people being killed, 12 wounded, after she said a school and a boarding school had been hit as a result of rocket fire from an airplane. Now, the Russian version of that is that they concentrated their firepower where there had been Ukrainian manpower and artillery, weaponry being stored. But she says it is Russia attacking the country's children and its future. So a renewed fighting, in a sense that really perhaps Zelensky was right earlier this week when he spoke of the fact that Ukraine seems to be moving closer to the border, and that Russia, according to that Ukrainian official speaking earlier this week, does seem to be concerned about it.
All right, Melissa Bell, live for us there. Thank you so much. In the West Bank, mourners have held a memorial procession for the slain Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Thousands of people turned out to pay their respects, including religious leaders and the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. In a speech, he honored Abu Akleh's life and blamed Israeli forces for her death. After the ceremony, Abu Akleh's body was taken to Jerusalem, where her funeral will be held on Friday. CNN's Hadas Gold joins us live now from the West Bank. So Hadas, what more are we learning about how the investigation is shaping up and what authorities are looking for specifically in order to determine culpability here?
Well, Zain, during that memorial procession in Ramallah earlier, I'm now in Jerusalem after the ceremonies. It was attended by, I would say, thousands of people, a cross-section of everything from politicians, religious officials, of course, many, many journalists and members of the public who at points were chanting. We could hear them chanting from inside the compound. They were chanting out on the street. The honest voice never dies. They were chanting as well. We sacrifice our blood and spirit for you, Shireen. And during his speech, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas specifically talked about the investigation and said that the Palestinian Authority will not work with the Israelis on a joint investigation. The Israelis had asked the Palestinian Authority to work with them in a joint investigation, potentially with international partners. But here's what the Palestinian Authority President had to say to that. Take a listen.
This crime is not the first of its kind. Tens of Palestinian journalists have fallen before Shireen. We hold the Israeli occupying forces fully accountable for her killing. We will not let them hide behind their crime and will not let it go unpunished. We rejected and continue to reject the joint investigation with the Israeli occupation authorities because they committed the crime and we do not trust them. We will go immediately to the International Criminal Court to track down the killers.
Now, Israeli officials say that they are conducting their own investigation into what happened, but that they do want to work with the Palestinians. They said that they specifically want the bullet, to look at the bullet that killed Shireen so that they could do ballistic analysis on it. However, the Palestinian Prime Minister, Mohammed Shtayyeh, specifically said, and I quote, "We will not give the Israeli side the bullet at any cost." So it seems as though each side is doing their own investigation. I could also note that the autopsy that's been done on Shireen, the doctors yesterday said that it was not clear who shot the bullet, that there will be an update to that autopsy. As you noted, though, tomorrow Shireen will be, her funeral will be held in a church in the old city of Jerusalem, and then she will be buried at the Mount Zion cemetery next to her parents in Jerusalem. Zain.
Yeah, and given the fact that, both sides are conducting their own investigation, you've got a complete lack of trust on both sides, unwillingness to cooperate, unwillingness to have any kind of joint investigation. I mean, how can there be a sort of fair conclusion to this, Hadass?
Well, in previous incidences, tragic incidences like these in the past, there have been times where there were joint investigations done and where actually Israeli forces did go to jail over these types of incidences, but those came with joint investigations with international cooperation as well. Now, the Israelis still say that they want to do a joint investigation, that they want to work together, but so far the Palestinians say that the evidence is conclusive and that they see it very clearly, and they are clearly blaming the Israeli military. Now, it is important to note that after this incident first took place, Israeli officials pretty quickly said that they thought it was likely that she was hit by Palestinian gunfire in the crossfire between the militants and the Israeli Defense Forces. And then they started to seemingly soften their stance a little bit, and they said that they never said it was conclusive that Palestinians did it, and that they were looking into what exactly happened, and now they're looking into all possibilities of what had happened. Zain.
Well, Hadass Gol, live for us there. Thank you so much. All right, still to come here on One World. North Korea orders strict health restrictions after reporting its first COVID outbreak. But experts say the measures may not be enough. We'll explain why next. Ukraine's forces are launching a counter-offensive, trying to regain control of the area surrounding the country's second largest city. Kharkiv has been the focus of intense shelling since Moscow's invasion. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh spoke with one woman who barely escaped with her life after a Russian strike.
Sometimes places that speak only of death throw up a jewel of life. This is the first time Ayuna has stood in this spot. Since 72 days ago, she was dragged out from the rubble here. Her husband, Andrei, had been scouring it, looking for her, for 3 hours. She remembers the cupboard.
That was where I was standing.
The multiple rocket attack on this, the Kharkiv regional administration, was an early sign of the ferocious, cowardly brutality Russia would unleash on civilian targets. This is Ayuna then. She had been serving coffee and cookies to soldiers, saw a flash and curled into a ball.
I feel a physical manifestation of fear. I don't like cookies anymore. A box fell on me and I remember the smell.
She asked to step away, saying she's sick with butterflies, like she hasn't felt since before races when she used to swim professionally. Andrei picks up the story.
When I heard her voice, I was crawling across the rubble, and the emergency services were trying to kick me out. I pulled a man out and then heard her. I did not plan to leave her here.
The soldiers waiting in the corridor outside from her died. The young women in the basement below her died. Their bodies not found for 3 weeks. Yet somehow the concrete here fell, shielding Ayuna.
I knew I was alive, in pain but nothing broken, but was worried I would be left and never be heard. The first time they heard me, they started to get me out, and the second missile came and I was properly trapped.
A rescuer eventually heard her.
Andrei got closer and I said it was me and he cried. They said they shouldn't lift the baton on me, but Andrei did, alone. It got easier to breathe. I was surprised as I thought I was still at ground level. The ambulance guy said, "It's your second birthday. You're alive."
Fragments of a Kharkiv now past pepper this shell, cleaning up and trying to sweep away its trauma.
I sleep with the lights on, and when there's a loud car or, God forbid, a jet plane, I brace. The nightmares that I'm again lying there and shivering cold, and that nobody hears my cries, that also stops me from sleeping.
Ayuna was born in Russia, but can no longer talk to her relatives there. She says they believe Russian state media's absurd claims this is a limited operation against Nazis.
They say it was my stupidity and that I don't need to be here. I hope when time passes our children can talk, but I can't talk to them now. Russia has lost its mind and cannot control its president. They are all each responsible, every citizen.
The story here not of ruins, loss or burial in dust, but instead of a feverish energy that burns through the building's bones, as Kharkiv gets to decide where its pieces fall now. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Germany is accusing Russia of using energy as a weapon after Moscow cut back its natural gas supplies to Europe. That move in retaliation for Western sanctions over the war in Ukraine. Berlin says that Moscow is no longer supplying gas to subsidiaries of Gazprom Germania, a state-supervised company. CNN's Anna Stewart joins us live now from London. So, Anna, what will this disruption mean for Europe's gas supplies, especially because Germany says that they've already found alternative sources?
Yes, and for Germany, this disruption comes on top of what we had yesterday in Ukraine, with them suspending a major gas transit route because of Russian interference, they say. They say Russian forces have been siphoning off gas. As a result, yesterday, Germany found that their Ukrainian gas, or the Russian gas coming through Ukraine, was decreased by 25%. Today, as a result of President Putin putting sanctions on some of these Gazprom European subsidiaries, as a result of that, they're also facing a shortage there. But the amounts actually are rather small, Zain. So Germany says it can weather this storm. It's got alternative suppliers. But what we're seeing now in the last week is a lot of different disruptions relating to Russian gas. And that spells trouble ahead, because even though they can find alternative suppliers right now, and it probably won't impact businesses or households that need heating, given we're in spring and heading to summer. It will impact Germany and the rest of Europe's ability to build up storage facilities, which they have been furiously trying to do, so that come winter, they are more resilient and they cut their reliance on Russian gas.
Right, Anna Stewart, live for us there. Thank you so much. Now to the coronavirus pandemic. The White House says that 1 million Americans have now died from COVID-19. It is a staggering number. And to honor the lives that have been lost, President Biden has ordered flags at federal buildings to be lowered to half-staff. He also released a sobering statement calling for more action to fight the crisis.
This pandemic isn't over. Today, we mark a tragic milestone here in the United States. 1 million COVID deaths, 1 million empty chairs around the family dinner table. Each irreplaceable losses. Each leaving behind a family, a community, forever changed because of this pandemic.
North Korea is reporting an outbreak of COVID-19 for the very first time. According to state media, the Omicron variant has been detected in Pyongyang. Leader Kim Jong-un is now ordering strict measures to get things under control. Paula Hancock has more.
This is likely the first time we've seen North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wear a mask in public since the pandemic began, ordering all cities to lock down after admitting the first COVID-19 case in Pyongyang.
We think that there have probably been cases before, but they haven't admitted them. And the fact that they've admitted them now would indicate that there's really no hiding it.
The number of cases of the Omicron variant are unknown, but North Korea is one of only 2 countries in the world believed to have delivered 0 COVID vaccinations.
Even in other settings where there's very low immunization coverage, presumably there would be higher levels of prior exposure. And so this is really a unique situation that we have in North Korea right now.
COVAX, the global vaccine sharing hub, has moved to a needs-based vaccine allocation, saying it's currently not committed any for North Korea. Pyongyang last year is believed to have rejected vaccines from China, according to the UN. China now says it is ready to provide its full support. The level of testing is low. Up until March 31st, just 64,000 people had been tested out of a population of over 25 million since the pandemic began. And health infrastructure in the country is fragile at best. Even developed health systems around the world have struggled under Omicron outbreaks.
I would imagine that in North Korea, the high levels of malnutrition may be an additional risk factor for severe disease and death associated with COVID-19 right now.
It is a population under lockdown in a country not set up for delivery of food and survival items. Extended isolation could have a serious impact on future food supply, already at a crisis in the country.
Could affect agriculture and harvest. It could affect, obviously, interior commerce within the country, the ability of the public distribution system, which is already, not working very well, to function.
As many experts wondered whether an Omicron outbreak would halt its recent run on missile and weapons tests, Pyongyang answered Thursday evening with another launch. Paula Hancock, CNN Seoul.
All right, so to come here on One World, this disturbing video may be key to proving Russia committed war crimes in Ukraine. We'll have details after the break. Hello and welcome back to One World. Let's catch up on the headlines. Officials in Shanghai, China say the COVID-19 curve there has begun to flatten, with daily new cases dropping. On Wednesday, the city reported more than 1,400 new infections. Shanghai is one of 32 Chinese cities that are in some form of lockdown. That's according to CNN's count, affecting about 220 million people. Sri Lanka saw a new Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, today as the country reels from its worst economic crisis ever. Former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned on Monday following weeks of violent protests. 9 people have been killed and hundreds more injured. And China is dismissing criticism from Western leaders. This after Hong Kong police arrested a 90-year-old cardinal and critic of China's Communist Party on Wednesday. Joseph Zen and 4 other pro-democracy activists are accused of colluding with foreign forces. If convicted, they could face life in prison. Ukrainian prosecutors have opened up a war crimes investigation after surveillance video shows Russian soldiers fatally shooting 2 unarmed Ukrainians in the back. We've seen many accusations, of course, of war crimes since Russia invaded Ukraine, but this one is particularly brutal and caught on tape. Sarah Seidner has a story which, we want to warn you, does contain very graphic video.
This is a stark example of a potential war crime perpetrated by Russian forces. An example the world has not yet seen. Russian soldiers shooting 2 civilians in the back. CNN obtained the surveillance video taken from this vehicle dealership that sits along the main highway to Kyiv. The video is from the beginning of the war, as Russians tried and failed to shell their way to the capital. The fight along this road was clearly fierce. But what happened outside this business was not a battle between soldiers or even soldiers and armed civilians. It was a cowardly, cold-blooded killing of unarmed men by Russian forces. The soldiers show up and begin breaking in. Inside of a guard shack, 2 Ukrainian men prepare to meet them. We tracked down the men's identities. One is the owner of the business, whose family did not want him named. The other was hired to guard it.
My father's name is Leonid Alexeyevich Platz.
His daughter Yulia wanted the world to know his name and what the Russians did to him. Both civilians, both unarmed. We know this because the video shows them greeting and getting frisked by the Russian soldiers, and then casually walking away. Neither seemed to suspect what was about to happen. That is what a member of the civilian fighting force who talked to the men a couple of days before the attack told CNN. He did not want to be identified for security reasons.
We came there earlier, warned people to leave that place. We also hope for the humanity of Russian soldiers. But unfortunately, they have no humanity.
You see the 2 men walking in the shadows toward the camera. Behind them, the soldiers they were just talking to emerge. A few more steps, and their bodies drop to the ground. Dust shoots up from the bullets hitting the pavement. The soldiers have opened fire. Minutes later, the guard, Leonid, gets up, limping but alive. He manages to get inside the guard booth to make a call to the local guys for help. This is one of those guys, a Ukrainian truck driver turned civilian soldier.
First of all, we felt a big responsibility. We knew we should go there because a man needed our help. He was still alive.
He's the commander of a ragtag team of civilians who took up arms to fight for Ukraine and tried to save the men. When the guard called them, he explained what transpired with the soldiers. He said the soldiers asked who they were and asked for cigarettes, then let them go, before shooting them in the back. When his men finally got to Leonid, he had lost massive amounts of blood.
One man from our group went there, and the guy was still alive. He gave him bandages, tried to perform first aid, but the Russians started shooting.
They tried to fight back, but were unsuccessful. They didn't have the firepower to save their countrymen.
Yulia, have you seen the video? I can't watch it now. I will save it to the cloud and leave it for my grandchildren and children. They should know about this crime and always remember who our neighbors are.
Her neighbors to the north, these Russian soldiers, showed just how callous they are, drinking, toasting one another, and looting the place minutes after slaying the 2 men.
What were the last words that you remember
he said to you.
Bye-bye, kisses, say hello to your boys.
Her boys will be left with a terrible, lasting memory, the death of their grandfather, now being investigated as a war crime by prosecutors. Sarah Seidner, CNN, Kyiv.
A new ruling by Afghanistan's Taliban has Afghan women and the United Nations concerned. Afghan women have been ordered to cover everything but their eyes in public, or else their male guardians could be punished. This week, women in Kabul bravely and defiantly protested the new rule. Paula Newton has more.
Defiance in Afghanistan. Women protesting in the capital Tuesday after the Taliban strips yet another freedom away.
Ever since the Taliban seized power in Afghanistan, all their projects have been against women. They want to limit and eliminate women from the field of society and politics.
A new Taliban decree over the weekend orders all women to cover their faces except their eyes in public or around men who aren't close adult relatives. It's to avoid provocation, the group spokesman says. Any woman who doesn't comply could see her male guardian jailed or lose his job. When the Taliban took over last year, they promised to respect women's rights within Islamic law. But the oppression of women remains a hallmark of Taliban rule. Since last August, they have barred girls from returning to school, banned women from traveling long distances without a male chaperone, and placed strict limitations on where women can work. Now, this latest decree becomes another measure chipping away at women's rights in Afghanistan and earning condemnation from Western leaders.
No country can succeed that holds back half of its population. It's women, it's girls. The Taliban's policies towards women, we think, are an affront to human rights and will continue to impair their relations with the international community.
The State Department spokesman saying the U.S. is working with international partners to influence the Taliban to reverse some of its restrictive rules on women. But some Afghan women's rights advocates say those changes would have to come from within.
I don't want anything from the countries of the world, from the governments, because they will promise, and that promise is never going to take place. And I have seen it. This is the time for the men of Afghanistan to stand next to their women. Don't you think it's about time that these men should stand next to us and ask the government, what do you think you're doing to our women? This is their right. They don't have to cover their faces.
As the Taliban focuses on restricting women, the humanitarian crisis worsens. Nearly 20 million people in Afghanistan face acute hunger, the United Nations warned Monday. Food insecurity rising, while human rights diminish, as the Taliban lives up to its fundamentalist roots. Paula Newton, CNN.
All right, we're getting our first look at a supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. It's called Sagittarius A star. It may look like just a blurry circle, but it's actually 4 million times more massive than our sun. The black hole's gravity is so strong, it's bending the light, which makes the ring. It took some 300 researchers around the world operating 8 radio telescopes to capture the image. And speaking of space, skygazers will get a treat this weekend, either late Sunday or early Monday, depending on where you live. You can catch a total lunar eclipse, and it will be a rare superblood moon. It's called a blood moon because sunlight filtering through the Earth's atmosphere gives the moon a reddish hue, and a supermoon appears brighter and larger than a normal full moon. This will be visible in parts of the Americas, Europe, Africa, and the East Pacific as well. All right, thank you so much for watching One World. I'm Zain Asher. Inside Africa is up next. You're watching CNN.
The concept of design is evolving across Africa. From community architecture in South Africa to mobile classroom furniture in Uganda.
To equip the learning environment is perhaps the first step to encouraging the interest to learn, encouraging curiosity.
These young creatives are thinking big.
We want to be the IKEA of Africa. For us, it's like, where's the next market? Where's the next country?
And designing solutions to shape the future of the continent.
It cannot be done by one person. I don't think we can create meaningful, greener architecture with the challenges of today. As individuals, we have to come together as collectives.
This is Inside Africa.
What excites me most about what I do is the human impact, the change on people's lives. When people who cannot afford architecture, communities that cannot afford architecture are able to suddenly access it, and they cannot believe that this is theirs, you know. I think more than that also, just in terms of the change in their lives, improving their lives, making their lives much more livable.
Kenyan-born Kevin Kimwele says he found his calling to practice architecture whilst on a road trip to South Africa.
Then I saw the city, Lusaka, in a very different way. This shelter at night, this bus stop at night, it becomes a lodge. All people of all walks of life assemble there. People buy mattresses, people buy airtime. You know, it's a market, it's a lodging, it's people buy food. This is the story of Africa, basically, especially the rural communities or the communities living in the periphery of the cities where they don't have infrastructure or they have very little access to this infrastructure. And I thought that maybe relearning architecture and learning how development works and being able to understand it in a way that would then enable a greater social economic impact.
Kevin is developing his skill set and knowledge through studying for a PhD in alternative design whilst running projects from his studio in Cape Town.
I'm one architect, but I'm engaged with many other architects and students and engineers, and we're able to very quickly narrow a problem and try, break it down and solve it. And what that does, it enables us to really push the boundaries of innovation, especially where alternative building methods are concerned. Very innovative work that is really important because it's creating acceptance of alternative building methods using waste, which many times is people are hesitant, you know, when they think about recycling and using waste in buildings and the red tape that you have to overcome. I think what makes this work different is that it's been able to push those boundaries and still produce great architecture.
Kevin's projects span a variety of different environments, from rural to peri-urban to developed.
The community project in Drakensberg is very interesting. It's a preschool which we have gradually improved into an eco-center and a preschool. And it's in a very remote rural area of the Drakensberg.
His projects take on a more personal note too. Whilst living in the Eastern Cape, Kevin designed a waste bike for a 76-year-old man who traded waste for food through a local community project. Fittingly, the bike was also made from recycled waste.
We've used everything from wine bottles to collapsible shipping containers. In the case of Gogo Selina, the whole structure, the whole building is actually built out of waste from the motor car industry.
Kevin teamed up with car manufacturer Isuzu Motors to rebuild the dilapidated home of Gogo Selina, a grandmother living in a Port Elizabeth township.
The community identified Gogo Selina out of her desperation because the roof of the house that she was living in was collapsing. And this was a one-roomed house built, I think, in mid-40s. And we thought, right, we were called in basically to revamp, stop the roof from falling in. But when we got there and we saw Selena's granddaughter learning in this environment, and we thought, well, it's very hard to concentrate when your books are next to the cooking stove and the bed and everything is in one room, you know. So we expanded that project and we built them a 2-bedroom house. And as we came to closer to an end and they started seeing the beauty of the building, you know, they were quite surprised that it's actually very affordable. It's something they can do, you know, and we've gotten a lot of requests from some of the community members if we can build them, and they're willing to pay for this, which is really important because it talks about a market. There is a market for this kind of architecture.
A stone's throw from his office, Kevin doesn't have to look far for inspiration.
We are at the Smoker Museum right here at the waterfront in Cape Town. And this whole building has actually been recycled or reused. And it's very inspiring to see such recycling at such a grand scale. And it's very much applicable to what we do too, in the sense that we're reusing and we are saving the carbon footprint, the energy, the water that has gone into all the utilities and giving them a new life.
Signs of a global green movement can be seen all around Cape Town, as captured by Brazilian street artist Tiago Mundano.
He's been doing great work in mobilizing communities, and the idea is with the whole global approach of connecting with people from different parts of the world. In this case, we're looking at the we movement, which is encouraging us to collectively think on recycling, on the green agenda. This is a collaboration between Europe, Brazil, South Africa, or Africa, India, where we are kind of bringing our minds together to see what we can do in the we approach.
Back in the studio, Kevin is working on a top secret project, which is expected to be a groundbreaking new urban development at the V&A waterfront.
This will be in a way a climax of the research work that I've been doing with my partners, because we are going to use a mainstream green template to actually prove that the work we're doing is still green. It creates the impact that we hope it can from an environmental and a social aspect, you know. So I think the difference here is we're really looking at solutions from Africa that we can support, that we can expand, and that we can replicate and scale out.
My name is Russko and I'm the founder of Taylor. Taylor is a Nigerian furniture and lifestyle brand.
Nigerian designer Jumoke Dada was inspired to start her own furniture business after attending a design event in 2016.
I think that hit moment came when I attended the conference some years back, and like there was this like Japanese designer, American designer come around into Lagos, and you know they were saying stuff like Africans are consumers, we don't produce anything from this part of the world. And for me, like I didn't hear that, I wasn't happy hearing that. And also I was a teenager and I was like, what's it about Africans being consumers? And for me, I realized that there's a way I can use my gifts, there's a way I can express myself.
Jumoke says she was able to secure funding for the business through a venture capital fund in 2019. This move allowed her to open up a tailor warehouse and office space in Lagos.
The furniture business in itself is a profitable business, to be honest. So from day one, we've been having some profits. And for us, our model is the D2C model. So, and it's not like we keep a lot of inventory. So most of our pieces are made to order. So it allows us like plan around cost and all of those things. So it still makes tailor a profitable business.
According to Jumoke, the business currently employs 94 people and produced 8,000 pieces of furniture, including bed frames, chairs, and desks in 2021.
It's really very important that most of the 99% of the local resources that we use in making some of these pieces are sourced locally.
The designer turns to one of her mentors for motivation. Bosun Tijani often advises Jumoke on some ways she can incorporate the use of technology into her business. And one of the ways she does this is through augmented reality.
On Tailor's platform, we have augmented reality. So augmented reality is like you can augment like a virtual product into your space real time to see if it fits or not.
Tailor does not have showrooms, so the AR feature of the website allows customers to view furniture in real time in their own space.
If you go to Tailor's website, click on a product. So on the product, you have the option to look at it in augmented reality. So if you click on the augmented reality bit, then you can like kind of embed it into your space to see how it goes.
The 27-year-old says her mother raised her to think independently, a skill that has proved useful in growing Tailor.
So for us at Tailor, it's like we want to be the IKEA of Africa, yeah? So for us, it's like, where's the next market? Where's the next country? Where are the next young millennials or people that we are serving? Like every day I wake up, that's the next thing I think about.